right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ark podcast. I am here for episode 26 of the Ark podcast, and we are doing Peter Dutton's budget reply. Now, if you didn't hear the breaking news today, it was leaked from the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet that the government is in some kind of a caretaker mode, which is usually what happens when an election is about to be called. Now, that tweet, I believe, wasn't meant to be sent. It was meant to be scheduled for tomorrow. And the reason why a lot of people are speculating, including Professor David Flint, a lot of people are speculating as to why that was to happen, is the Labor Party, Anthony Albanese, they know Peter Dutton is going to deliver his budget reply tonight, but they want to take out the wind from his sails. So we're very much looking forward to seeing the election kick off finally. I get sick of watching parliamentarians just running around and campaigning on the public dime, because once the election gets called, it's then on their donations dime and their party donations dime. So to help me dissect the budget for tonight, and I'm keeping an eye on the ABC to flick over to it, is I've got Shaquille Letma, who was with me on Tuesday. Shaquille, welcome back to the show.
You get me watching the ABC again.
Yeah.
3 times now.
Honestly, I can't help it. I really just think that the ABC, but you know what though, Shaquille? They did ask some very good questions on Tuesday of Mr. Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer for Labor. I thought they were hard hitting, and she did ask proper follow-up questions.
She asked a few good questions. Look, I'm actually, so I agree with you in your assessment that this is designed to overshadow Peter Dutton, but look, call me conspiratorial. Maybe it's just because I don't like the Labor Party very much.
Yeah.
Maybe it was deliberate. Put out a tweet and then delete it, because right now you look at most media coverage. Most people are fairly underwhelmed, I think, by Jim Chalmers' speech, and unlike us, most people wouldn't have watched it all. Like, having watched it, I said, on Tuesday, I said, look, it sounds inspiring, it sounds really great. It's one-sided, obviously, and tonight's going to be one-sided in the other direction, hopefully in the other direction. But it's just kicking the can down the road, and it's just more of the same, and that's basically what they're promising us, more of the same. Yeah, I mean, $50 a week in savings.
50 or 5?
Sorry, 5. That's right. $5 a week
less than
savings.
Yeah.
I mean,
coffee, mate. A cup of coffee.
Exactly. You got rising electricity prices and that sort of stuff. But the other thing is, I've had a few emails, a few people that have sort of contacted me and said, look, when you and Stephen Pettis and many of your lot talk about leaving Australia and going overseas, and you talk about employing people overseas, that's exactly what we're trying to get away from. We're trying, to keep jobs here and to keep working. And I just want to be clear with everybody. It's not because I don't want to be here because of my fellow Australians. I love my fellow Australians and I love this country. But when government makes it so impossible to run a business here or to do anything here, that's you start to look for alternatives. Yeah. And what I've actually found is I've met a lot of people recently who either have left Australia or are about to leave Australia. And I've got a number of friends of mine that have left the United States, left the United Kingdom, etc. And that's the real damage that's being done. Look at the record number of bankruptcies that have happened within the building industry and construction industry over the last a couple of years.
2,834 or something.
Yeah.
Insane. And they're like, we can train more builders to replace them.
But, somebody has to take the risk when it comes to employing them, or are you going to just employ them all by big government contractors or government directly? It's farcical. And I think that really, because there has been actually some, not just sharp criticism from the business community, but I was quite surprised. A number of big company CEOs that had backed Albo and backed The Voice and backed all of that have actually come out and opposed or criticised this budget reply. So what you've got now is a lot of media attention going onto this tweet, right?
Yeah.
And not really on Dutton.
No.
So as far as a move, I don't like it, but that's a pretty good move. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah,
credit's due.
Look, I thought it was pretty sly as well. And yes, we did talk about this yesterday with Professor David Flint. I was showing you the clip from that yesterday, and what was really interesting about it was the fact that Professor David Flint, he was making the point that, look, the Governor-General should be staying out of these sorts of things. We should allow the proper course of the debate to take place. There's a budget from the government that wants to renew its term. We know it's, an election is in 2 months. And then on the other side, we've got Peter Dutton's, a couple days later, his budget. He should be given fair reply. Now, what would normally happen, what the normal convention would happen with David Flint, he was saying the Prime Minister would go this weekend to the Governor-General, request to call an election, and that would happen early next week. But that is not what's happening. He's basically announcing it tomorrow. In fact, this is just from 6 News, which is Leo, who we've covered in the past, basically making the point that Anthony Albanese will call a federal election tomorrow morning for May 3. Oh, wow. Okay, so that's a lot sooner than I thought. Watch Peter Dutton's budget reply live from 7 p.m. Guys, that is not good. That is not good, and you're getting my live reaction. That means less time to get ready. Clearly what he's done is not only did he want to kneecap the Liberal Party's budget reply, but they also actually wanted to make the point that they want to minimise the amount of time that there is an election. So as Prime Minister, when you call an election, you have the ability to make it anywhere from up to 10 weeks and as short as 4 weeks. Instead of doing it on the 17th to offer us an extra 2 weeks, I believe what he's done is he's like, okay, every Labor Party candidate has been pre-selected. There are still Liberal seats that haven't got candidates yet. I mean, the seat of Watson doesn't yet have a Liberal candidate. It's a Labor seat, doesn't yet have a Liberal candidate. And so they have Labor of all their ducks in a line. They've clearly planned this out really well, and they're executing this ambush. And the Liberals are just absolutely feckless. I mean, let's see what Peter Dutton can do tonight. Maybe he can renew our confidence.
It's a beautiful move from the Labor Party. Like it really is. If you're a Labor Party supporter or a Greenie or whatever, this is a great move from them. But you had actually mentioned this quite some months ago, that this is what your fear is that the Labor Party would do.
Yeah.
And the question is, who the hell are the Liberal Party strategists?
Yeah. Yeah, no, look, the Liberal Party strategists are basically the ones that never lose their jobs, even if they're wrong. So they suffer no just like the professors at university, they suffer no cost for being wrong with certain ideas. And so, look, when it comes to the election, I was worried late last year. I was saying to the Freedom Parties, what do you mean you're going to hold a pre-selection for your Senate candidate in March next year? The election could be in December. Yeah. And I said, you need to be ready now, campaigning now, getting out there now. That's what Labor's doing. Everything for the last 6 months has been preparing for this announcement. And I said, once it didn't happen in December, the next horizon where they would make a decision and assess the situation is, how does the WA election go? And they're laughing. They are laughing after the WA election, even though there was a ton of fraud with regards to the way the
alleged fraud. So
the alleged, of course, the alleged fraud
Google will take us down.
Absolutely, from the private company. But I'm just looking, guys, now that we're about to go across to the budget. But they saw that, they were like, okay, beautiful. That's why I've noticed a skip in Albo's step, in Jim Chalmers' step, because they think they've got this home and hose. They don't think it's going to be Labor majority, but they've already made the deals with the Teals, the crossbenchers for the lower house and the upper house to secure power.
I will say he definitely needs to Botox his jowls. He looks so unhappy all through that speech. But look, this is the issue. I again save the criticism for my own party the most, right? Because it doesn't really matter what I think of the Labor Party. I'm not going to vote for him. I'm highly unlikely to vote for him. But if the Liberals do this, what do you expect? What choices are you giving Australians? And you know what? In the last few months, in my personal view, if the Labor Party does win as you're predicting, it's the Liberal Party's fault. Sorry, guys. We have to switch over. Peter Dutton is kicking off the speech right now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, to Australians listening tonight, thank you very much for your time. Soon you'll have a say in determining the future of our great country. We live literally in the best country in the world, and we're the beneficiaries of what our forebears have built and defended. We love this country because it has forged us into a remarkable people. We're compassionate, we're stoic, we're fair, and we're quietly patriotic. We cherish this country because it affords opportunities like no other. But only, and I stress this point, if we're governed well. When Australia is governed badly, dreams and ambitions become beyond reach. And that's what's happened during the last 3 years of the Albanese government. In my travels across the country, Australians tell me that they're working hard, but they're not getting ahead. In Perth, a mum in a grocery store, in tears, told me how her husband and children couldn't keep their heads above water with the bills stacking up. In Adelaide, I spoke with a food manufacturer whose electricity prices had gone up by about 300%. In Victoria, I spoke with a supermarket employee, a woman in her 60s, who had a machete held against her throat during a robbery. In Brisbane, I listened to a young couple in their 30s who have moved back in with their parents because they simply can't buy a home, even though both of them are working overtime. Now, such stories have now become commonplace across our country. Stories of rent and mortgage stress, stories of power, shopping and insurance bills going through the roof, stories of home ownership being out of reach for so many, and stories of it being increasingly difficult to see and to afford a GP, and stories of crime on our streets. For so many Australians, aspiration has turned to anxiety, optimism to pessimism, and national confidence to national uncertainty. The truth is Australians can't afford 3 more years of the Albanese government. Yeah. Now, every election is important, but this election does matter more than others in recent history. It is a sliding doors moment for our nation. A returned Albanese government in any form won't just be another 3 bleak years. More economic mistakes will take a lot longer to recover from. Setbacks will be set in stone and our prosperity will be damaged for decades to come. But you have the power to change the path our country is on. You have the ability to reverse decline, and you have the opportunity to get our country back on track. You can do that by voting for your Liberal or Nationals candidate so that a new Dutton coalition government can be elected. And at this election, the choice could not be clearer. Tonight, I'll outline the choice Australians face at this election and our plan to fix Labor's mess. We have a positive plan to deliver: a stronger economy with lower inflation, cheaper energy, affordable homes, quality healthcare and safer communities. A plan to help you and your families. A plan to bring about a stronger, safer and better Australia. A plan to usher in more confident, resilient and self-reliant people right across the country. And we need to accept that we live in a more dangerous and disruptive world. And to these ends tonight, I will announce new policies that a coalition government would implement. Tonight, I commit a coalition government to the following. We will introduce 4 critical pieces of legislation on the first sitting day in the next parliament. 1, the Energy Price Reduction Bill. 2, the Lower Immigration and More Homes for Australians Bill. The Keep Australians Safe Bill. And the Guaranteed Funding for Health, Education and Essential Services Bill. This is my signal to the Australian people of what my priorities will be in government. In his 4th budget, like the previous 3, the Treasurer again painted a rosy picture of the economy. But Australians aren't silly. Your bills tell the true story of Labor's cost of living crisis. And here's the facts of the Albanese government's economic record. Rents are up by 18%. Housing is up by 14%. Groceries up by a staggering 30%. Electricity is up by 32%, and insurance is up for many households and businesses by 35%. Australians have experienced the longest household recession and the worst collapse in living standards in our country's history. Under Labor, interest rates have gone up 12 times, but only been cut once, and they've stayed higher for longer compared to other comparable nations. This budget makes clear that Labor was only able to deliver 2 surpluses, piggybacking off the former coalition government's strong economic management, as well as record commodity price windfalls. And now the outlook is one of deficits as far as the eye can see. For 3 years, Labor peddled the lie that they inherited $1 trillion of debt. Yet in the budget papers that we saw on Tuesday night, they confirm that the Labor Party will burden Australia with $1 trillion of debt as of next year. Tuesday's budget was one for the next 5 weeks, not one for the next 5 years. It was a shameless election voting exercise, not a plan for our country's future. It was about saving Prime Minister Albanese, not about you, and certainly not about safeguarding our nation. Jim Chalmers' so-called tax cut top-up is simply a tax cut cop-out. It's a cruel hoax. Now, Labor will spend $17 billion of taxpayers' money to give you back 70 cents a day in 15 months' time. And yet a family with a typical mortgage under this government is $50,000 worse off. I think it's insulting, to be honest. Now, we oppose these tax cuts and will repeal them because we think there's a better way to provide assistance to Australians. We will provide immediate cost of living relief for Australians. A coalition government will halve the fuel excise for 12 months and then we'll review it. And we'll make sure that that comes in on the first day that our parliament sits. For a household with 1 car filling up once a week, that's a savings of about $14 a week, or around $700 over the year. For a household with 2 cars filling up once a week, that is a savings of $28 a week, or around $1,500 over 12 months. Compare that to 70 cents a day in 15 months' time. Now, working with industry will ensure that heavy vehicle road users also benefit from this measure, and we'll make sure the ACCC will ensure that the fuel excise cut will be passed on in full to consumers. The policy will cost $6 billion. Amidst Labor's cost of living pressures, charities are experiencing increased demand, including from Australians who never previously relied on that support. To scale up assistance and provide immediate relief, we will commit $50 million for food charities like Food Banks, Second Bite and Oz Harvest to expand their services and to include school breakfast programs. They approached the government with this plan and it was rejected in this budget. Of course, to get out of Labor's economic mess and to tackle Labor's cost of living crisis, we need hard decisions and a proper plan. The coalition government will do 3 things. First, we will rein in inflationary spending. We will reduce the cost of energy. And third, we will strengthen the economy so that it works for you. I just want to address each of those aspects in turn. Mr Speaker, over 3 years, the Albanese government has increased spending as a share of the economy more than any government since the recession of the 1990s. Now, it's lifted spending by an extraordinary $425 billion. That's about $40,000 per Australian household. Now, much of this spending hasn't gone to essential services or generated economic activity. Rather, it's been inflationary, it's been ineffectual and it's been wasteful. Such rapid and unrestrained spending is not only adding to the debt that our children will have to repay, but it's also keeping the pressure on inflation. And during a cost of living crisis, that's the last thing that you want. And the Reserve Bank Governor has independently pointed out this great failing in this bad government. Core inflation under this government has averaged more than double what it was under the coalition. Personal income taxes paid have also increased by about 24% under Labor. The average taxpayer is now paying $3,500 more tax this year alone, or for a dual income household, $7,000, and that's a big hit. I want Australian families to be making choices about what they will eat, not choices about whether they can eat or heat, which is the prospect facing many people, particularly pensioners and those on low incomes in our country right now. I want to make sure that we can fight the cost of living pressures because we need to get interest rates down. And to get interest rates down, we need, of course, to get inflation down. To get inflation down, we need to address its underlying causes, and that's just something the government hasn't done. We want to stop wasteful government spending. And tonight I announce that a coalition government will rein in key inflationary, ineffectual and imprudent spending, which has been a hallmark of this government. We will end the reckless $20 billion Rewiring the Nation Fund. We will stop the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund, which has not built a single additional home. We will scrap Labor's nearly $14 billion of production tax credits for green hydrogen because it is not going to work. We'll reverse Labor's increase of 41,000 Canberra public servants because it will save about $7 billion a year. That's money that we can provide back to the Australian people in frontline services. And the growth rate of public servants under this government in Canberra is about 3 times the rate it was under the Rudd-Gillard government. But I make this guarantee to the Australian people tonight. In line with our national interest, we will continue to invest in essential services and critical areas of the economy, like health and aged care, veteran support, the NDIS, Indigenous affairs, childcare and defence. We won't cut frontline service delivery roles. We will ensure that the services Australians rely on are sustainable. Under Labor, you will be guaranteed of a number of things, but one thing I'm sure of is more reckless and wasteful spending, which will cause interest rates and inflation to stay higher for longer. And that means you'll pay more for everything. More for food, more for rents, more for your mortgage, more for power and more for insurance. You'll continue to pay more tax too. But under the coalition, we will fight cost of living pressures at their source. At the very centre of Labor's cost of living crisis is, of course, the skyrocketing cost of energy. And that's due, of course, to Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen's reckless renewable-only policy train wreck. Now, as every Australian knows, energy is the economy. Australians are paying some of the highest power prices in the world, indeed up to 3 times more than comparable economies. And the Albanese government has broken its core election promise when it comes to energy. Your electricity bill hasn't gone down by $275, as Labor promised, on 97 occasions. The Prime Minister and the Treasurer refuse even to mention that word, even though they looked you in the eye and said that they would bring your power prices down by $275 each year. As Australians can attest, they're now paying more than $1,300 than what Labor promised in their energy bills.
Another $5 a week that we missed out on.
I think the point to make is it's not just homeowners and renters who are paying higher power bills. It's farmers, it's business owners, it's cafe owners, it's manufacturers too. Across the economy, it's costing more to grow food, more to produce goods, more to store the food and the goods, and certainly to deliver services. And those costs are just passed on to Australian consumers, which is why Australians are feeling the crunch at the moment. I want Australians to be putting items in their shopping trolley, not putting them back onto supermarket shelves. I want businesses to be able to hire more staff, not to be putting more money aside to pay ever-increasing power bills. Now, Mr Speaker, gas is the key in our country, as it is around the developed world, to manufacturing, to making electricity and to keeping the lights on. But the Albanese government has stalled projects from getting off the ground and created a national gas emergency due to insufficient supply. We now know that in our country, Victoria is about to spend money building an import terminal to bring gas in to Victoria, to import gas into Victoria. Under Labor, gas prices have gone up for households and businesses by 34% and 43% respectively. The Coalition understands what Labor won't. You can't run a full-time and functioning economy using part-time and unreliable power. Under Labor, the energy crisis and therefore your pain will continue. Bills will keep going up because the cost of putting out 28,000 kilometres of new transmission lines will just be passed on to Australians. Our energy grid will become more unstable with a greater reliance on sometimes on power, which equals blackouts and brownouts. And you can expect a lot of energy rationing in Australia under an Albanese government re-elected. Under the Coalition, Energy will become affordable and reliable again. We will use a mix of technologies, which include always-on power, to firm up the renewable, sometimes on power. And the only way to drive down power prices quickly is to ramp up domestic gas production. And tonight I announce our National Gas Plan. This plan will prioritise domestic gas supply, address shortfalls and reduce energy prices for Australians. This is all about ensuring Australian gas is for Australians. We will immediately introduce an East Coast gas reservation. This will require a proportion between 50 to 100 petajoules of spot cargo exports to be delivered to the domestic market. This will secure an additional 10 to 20% of the East Coast demand, gas which would otherwise be exported for use in other markets by consumers in those countries. But our gas needs to be first and foremost for our people. Gas sold on the domestic market will be decoupled from overseas markets to protect Australia from international price shocks, and this will drive down new wholesale domestic gas prices from around $14 per gigajoule to under $10 per gigajoule. And this is just the start. We will immediately audit development-ready projects with a focus on the southern states. We will fast-track a decision on Western Australia's North West Shelf project. The government has delayed a decision on that project conveniently until the 31st of May, which happens to be after the election. So good luck in WA. We will halve approval times. We will defund the activist-led Environmental Defenders Office, which has been disgraced and which has obstructed projects. We will accelerate new investment into gas projects by reinstating a $300 million strategic basin plan and include gas in the capacity investment scheme. We will invest $1 billion into a critical gas infrastructure fund and increase gas pipeline and storage capacity. We will put in place use it or lose it stipulations for gas drilling companies, so offshore gas fields are not locked up for years. And we will ensure that we have a fit-for-purpose gas trigger to safeguard supply. This plan, Mr Speaker, will lower wholesale gas prices, which will flow across the economy. Our National Gas Plan is expected to push prices down for new gas sales to below $10 per gigajoule, compared to the $14 in the market today. Energy prices will always be lower under a coalition government. A coalition government will also secure our nation's energy security for decades to come and over the longer term. We will join the other 19 top economies in the world in adopting proven zero-emissions nuclear power. This is one of the most visionary and necessary policies put forward in our country's history. It was supported by Bob Hawke and it's supported by John Howard and other leaders of our nation. And it will underpin our energy security for the next century. Our plan has been independently costed at 44% cheaper than Labor's plan. Labor has never been able to dispute that outcome. And what it means is that there is a savings of $263 billion for Australians. If a plan is cheaper, electricity prices will be cheaper, as fewer costs, of course, are passed on to consumers. Nuclear power's high yield of energy and small footprint means that there's no need to carpet our national parks, prime agricultural land and coastlines with industrial-scale renewables. The Coalition has the only energy policy which protects our environment and safeguards the livelihoods of regional Australia. Mr Speaker, the exorbitant cost of energy is one reason why a record 29,000 small businesses have gone insolvent under Labor. It's one reason why there's been a threefold increase in the number of manufacturers who have closed under Mr Albanese's watch. But another reason is Labor's excessive regulation and interference in the economy. Sectors critical for our economy, like mining, manufacturing, forestry, fishing and agriculture, have been crippled by Labor's weaponisation of environment, industry, IR and cultural heritage laws. And we're seeing industries simply pack up and go offshore and international partners withdraw investment from our country. For all of Anthony Albanese's talk of a future made in Australia, the opposite is actually the fact. Less is being made in Australia under this government's watch, and more is being made abroad. The last 3 years are a lesson. No government can subsidise the economy to success. Under Labor, we'll continue to see a hollowing out of our economy. Industries and businesses will continue to collapse in record numbers or simply move operations offshore, which means that we lose those jobs. Under the Coalition, we will build a stronger economy, not only by getting power prices down, but also by ripping up as much red and green tape as possible. Tonight I commit to removing regulatory burdens where we can, where there's duplication across local, state and federal government during a first-term coalition government. My intention is to make Australia a mining, agricultural, construction and manufacturing powerhouse once again. The revenue generated from these revived sectors will create more money to build new infrastructure, to fund health and education and, importantly, to equip our defence forces. In addition to backing our natural strengths, we will encourage new areas of the economy, like artificial intelligence, like automation, like cybersecurity and space, bio and nanotechnologies. AUKUS 2 has the potential to foster a new arm of our economy and transform our civil industrial base. We will spend taxpayers' money wisely in a manner which has an economic multiplying effect, a way in which it generates productivity and can attract new investment. And that's better for you, for your family, and it'll create jobs for your children and grandchildren. And we will curtail union militancy in workplaces. We will revert to a simple definition of a casual worker, the corrupt and disgraced CFMEU, which has donated $11 million to the Labor Party, that in turn has seen the Labor Party turn a blind eye to them and their illegal conduct. It will be deregistered. And the construction industry watchdog will be restored so that we can have safety again on big building sites. New anti-racketeering laws will be legislated, and a dedicated Australian Federal Police-led task force will tackle the criminal elements in our building sector that are ripping off Australians and undermining productivity. Prime Minister, I would never tolerate seeing a member of a union, or any person for that matter, kicking a woman on camera and not even commenting in relation to it. It was a disgrace, and it was a disgrace that this government allowed it to happen. And it's a common practice from the CFMEU. Reviving growth, Mr Speaker, also means having the back of small business, including tax relief. We've got tax relief coming for small business. We will increase the instant asset write-off from $1,000 under this government to $30,000, and we're going to make that arrangement ongoing. We'll provide a deduction of up to $20,000 per year for small businesses for business-related meal expenses, which is also a much-needed shot in the arm for struggling cafes, restaurants and pubs. If your kids or grandkids work in a local cafe or in a local pub or club, this will see them get more hours and have more secure employment. It will allow a local real estate agency or a builder to take staff to a local cafe to celebrate a big sales event or simply to say thank you to their hard-working employees. It creates jobs and it supports the struggling hospitality sector. I want small businesses to be taking risks, calculated risks, not shutting up shop. Reviving growth and preparing our economy for the future also means supporting skills development. Tonight I announced that a coalition government will set a target of 400,000 apprentices and trainees in training across Australia. Our plan is to restore targeted and proven incentive payments for employers to hire and train an apprentice. We will provide small and medium businesses with $12,000 to support them to put on a new apprentice or trainee in critical skills areas for the first 2 years of their training. It will have a particular focus in the building and construction sector. Mr Speaker, addressing Labor's cost of living crisis and energy crisis is just the start. In its first 2 years, the government brought in 1 million people through the migration program. That's 70% more migrants than in any 2-year period in Australia's history. And of course there'll be consequences. And yet, after 3 years in power, the Albanese government hasn't delivered a single additional new home built under its failed housing policies. Australians are generous and welcoming people, but they want migration to be sustainable and the government to be in control of it. Labor is neither in control of migration, nor has it kept migration at sustainable levels, and Australians know it. I don't want young Australians locked out of the property market or having to rely on the bank of mum and dad. I want to see fewer Australians homeless and more Australians in homes. Mr Speaker, under Labor, migration will continue to put pressure on housing, on infrastructure and on services. But under the Coalition, we will cut the migration intake to free up housing and restore the great Australian dream of home ownership. We will cut the permanent migration program by 25%. We will ban foreign investors and temporary residents from purchasing existing Australian homes for a period of 2 years. We will set stricter caps on foreign students to relieve stress on rental markets, and we will invest $5 billion in essential infrastructure to get stalled housing projects up and going, and it's going to create 500,000 new homes. We'll allow for first home buyers to access up to $50,000 of their super for a home deposit because it's better to get into a home sooner. When a government doesn't have any achievements to speak about, which is the reality for this government, it resorts to smears and scare campaigns. There's no greater sign of the Albanese government's desperation than its Medi-Scare campaign, Labor's third attempt in less than a decade. But while Labor peddles falsehoods, we'll remind Australians of the facts. On this government's watch, bulk billing nationally has fallen by 11%. There's 41 million fewer bulk billing episodes with GP services under this government. And more than 270 GP practices have closed under this government's watch. Australians should never have to choose between seeing a doctor or paying their bills. Under Labor, Australians will have ongoing pressures on the health system, but under the Coalition, we will deliver quality health care. We will invest $9.4 billion into health. That includes incentivising junior doctors, as I announced last year, to work as GPs to address the current shortages at your local clinic. We will boost Medicare bulk billing. We will invest in hospitals, especially in high population growth areas where there's the biggest strain on services. We will guarantee cheaper medicines and lower the pharmaceutical benefits scheme co-payment to $25, and we'll invest $500 million into women's health. And we'll double the subsidised mental health sessions from 10 to 20 and make this arrangement permanent. Many young Australians require access to mental health services in any given year. And tonight I announced that a coalition government will invest an additional $400 million into youth mental health services. We will expand the remit of the National Centre for Excellence in Youth Mental Health, which I created in 2014, into a national institute. We will boost regional services and expand treatment to Australia at the forefront of youth mental health treatment in the world. We will continue to support the world-leading Medical Research Future Fund, which I established as the then Health Minister. There is now more than $20 billion in that fund, and it's providing support to our specialists all around the country, to scientists, to researchers, to labs, all of them working on incredible projects, and that funding will continue to provide them with support and Australians with hope. Mr Speaker, in my travels across the country, Australians tell me they've never been more worried about crime and division in our community. It started with the Prime Minister's Voice referendum, which sought to divide our country by ancestry and race. He then left a vacuum of leadership following the crime wave in Alice Springs and the anti-Semitism on the steps of the Sydney Opera House. All too often the Prime Minister is too weak, too late and too equivocal. This government has released 300 hardcore criminals from immigration detention into the community, with more than a third having reoffended against Australian citizens. It granted tourist visas to 3,000 people from a terrorist-controlled war zone conducted without security checks that should have been put in place. It's failed to deter people smugglers trying to reach our shores by illegal boats. It's turned a blind eye when our military personnel have been endangered, and it didn't stand up for our country when Chinese communist warships entered our waters without notice. And it relied on Virgin Australia pilots to alert us to the Chinese Navy's live fire exercise off our coast. Australia should be a country where people live without fear and without worrying about the future. Under Labor, you'll get the same weakness of leadership that has compounded crime and emboldened anti-Semitism on our streets. You'll get a nation that is less safe and less secure. But under the Coalition, we will provide the moral and political leadership needed to restore law, order and justice. Yeah. We will establish a dedicated anti-Semitism task force to turn the tide of this scourge of hatred. Every Australian should be equally treated. We will work with states and territories to develop national uniform knife laws. We will toughen bail laws to stop domestic violence offenders. We will again stop the boats, just as we did in 2013, and we will again deport dangerous non-citizen criminals, just as I did as Home Affairs Minister in cancelling 6,300 visas of murderers, of sex offenders and drug traffickers, something this government hasn't continued. We will again invest in defence to play our part as a credible partner to deter aggression and to maintain peace. We've already committed to $3 billion of additional funding to reinstate the 4th Squadron of the F-35 Joint Strike Fighters cancelled by Labor. Our plan is to energise our domestic defence industry and to retool the ADF with asymmetric capabilities to deter a larger adversary. Mr Speaker, during the election campaign we will announce our significant funding commitment to defence, a commitment which, unlike Labor's, will be commensurate with the challenges of our times. The Prime Minister of our country and the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister for Defence, tells Australians regularly that we live in the most precarious period, the most dangerous period since the end of the Second World War. What leader of a country says that and then doesn't do anything about it? We will nurture pride and unity in our country. We will provide support to the Australian Defence Force to keep us safe today and into generations ahead, at a time when we most need it. That starts, of course, by making sure that we don't fail young Australians. And I think this is an incredibly important point. A coalition government will restore a curriculum that teaches the core fundamentals in our classrooms, a curriculum that cultivates critical thinking, responsible citizenship and common sense. Mr Speaker, this election is as much about leadership as it is about policy, and the choice is clear at the next election. I will be a strong leader with a steady hand. I will make the tough decisions, not shirk them. I will put the national interest first. I will lead with conviction, not walk both sides of the street, and I have real-life experience to demonstrate it. As a veteran of the police force who dedicated 9 years to protecting Australians, especially women and children, a small business owner who started and successfully ran businesses, someone who came from a working-class background and knows the value of hard work and the aspiration that drives Australians, a parent, along with my wife Kiralee, who understands the family is the most important unit in our society. I want to give a shout out to Kiralee tonight, who's just had surgery on her wrist and is at home watching with Rebecca, Harry and Tom, unless maths clashes with this broadcast. I've been an assistant treasurer in our country. I've been a former Minister for Health. I've been a Minister for Immigration, Minister for Home Affairs and Minister for Defence, which was an enormous honour. I lead a united and incredibly capable team. We're ready to govern. We're ready to deliver a stronger economy with lower inflation, cheaper energy, affordable homes, quality health care and safer communities. And we will govern with respect for the views, values and vision of everyday Australians. Australians are worse off under the Albanese government, and Australians cannot afford 3 more years of this bad Labor government. I say to Australians tonight, at this election, you can make the right choice. A better choice for you, a better choice for your family and a better choice for your country. Together, let's build a stronger, safer and better Australia, and let's together get our country back on track.
Well done. Well done, everyone. Very good. Jolly good, well. Very good. Excellent. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Welcome back. That was the opposition leader,
Lovely.
Peter Dutton, giving his reply to the...
All right, what do you think about that, Shaq? That was...
Well, maybe we should listen to her for 30 seconds.
Yeah,
We did on
yeah.
Tuesday.
No, yeah,
discuss
we can,
that
but it's
speech.
just the
We're in
it's
this
just the
unusual world, aren't we, where
commentators
we've
at this
got
stage.
a
It's
leader
not
of the
exactly.
opposition, a Liberal leader,
Once he
not
comes in-
offering tax cuts.
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
There is,
once
of
he comes
course,
in,
the
we'll go from there. But I'll keep an eye on it. What are your opening reactions to that?
Well, my first opening reaction is AI sucks. I was trying to get AI to do to keep the key points for me, so I don't have to keep writing it down on the paper.
Yeah.
And it can't do it from a live video stream on YouTube.
Right.
The second thing, I know this is not answering your question. I've been talking to some of our viewers that are in the comments section. Why exactly is chat disabled on YouTube for ABC for something like this? Shouldn't Australians that are watching, I mean, I think there's only 600 or 700 of them or something, but...
They just don't want to be mugged by Nazis, is what they would say.
Yeah, like, surely you want to actually hear, people debate across the political spectrum, especially ABC watchers are normally on the left, but this is one of the times when you get people from across the political spectrum.
Yeah, you're right. It is.
So
It's turned off. Yeah.
So I'll make a couple of
General observations about tone and everything.
Yeah, look, I like the tone. I think that was I think that's about as inspiring as Peter Dutton gets.
Had a good moment with the maths thing.
Yeah,
My wife's watching Married at First Sight. That was pretty good.
I thought he did a good job. Look, I truly think he'd be the better Prime Minister. And I just think that the Labor Party has just let Australians down. The polls are sort of indicating, I think, what your prediction is, that it could be a Labor minority. I just hope that Australians will see through it. I hope it's a little bit like when the White House came out and said that people were going to save 13 cents or something for Thanksgiving. You know what I mean? It just went down ridiculously. And when he broke it down from $5 a week, as we've been saying, to 70 cents a day. That's the promise of the Labor Party, 70 cents a day. Just send us a cheque for 70 cents a day then. just drop it straight in my bank account then. Don't worry about subsidising all these other things.
Literally.
There was one thing that I did want to just say, and I hope that there are some Liberal Party and National Party people that'll hear this comment from me. In his opening speech, he talked about how great Australia is, the people that came before us to help create this country. And he made a comment that Australians are quietly patriotic. I don't want to be quietly patriotic. You have no idea how important Australia Day is to me, how important the Australian flag is to me and to my family. My family immigrated here. I was born here, right? It means something. Don't take it away from me. Let me celebrate it. So I don't want to be quietly patriotic.
No.
I want to be loudly patriotic. I shouldn't come on podcasts and put myself out here and start carrying on like a pork chop.
Yeah.
But I do so because I really feel like our country is going in the wrong direction. And it's going in the wrong direction even outside of just, taxes and politics and, this and that. It's going in the wrong direction because of priorities just being in the wrong places. And that upsets me. It really does. It hurts.
Yeah.
So I don't think that I'm alone in that thought.
Yeah.
And even those people that I meet who are centre left, they don't like it either, right? We've got a country to be proud of, and we need to keep that going.
Yeah. It's like we're losing something special, something nostalgic, the Australia we grew up with. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was going to you. Okay.
No.
So, look, deregistering the CFMEU. Look, again, I have been a member of a union because I was forced to by the owner of the company I worked for, but I was, a 15-year-old apprentice.
Yep.
I'm not the biggest fan of unions, but I'm not the biggest. I don't want to oppose them altogether. I think unions have done some good work. The CFMEU, look, they represent a lot of people, and the problem isn't with their membership. The problem's with their management, with the governance of the CFMEU. That's where the problem has lied. So, deregistering it, you'd have to have something to come in to replace it if that was the path you went down. I was a little bit concerned when he said he wanted to protect Australia gas for domestic use and decouple it from the international market. That sounds like a bit of government intervention instead of the free market positions that the Liberal Party would ordinarily take. It could be a good idea, but it could also cause some issues. There was a Sky News reporter, and unfortunately I forget his name, but he actually did a report on renewable energy, and he was talking. He interviewed the CEO of Woodside. He interviewed the CEO of Transgrid, which a lot of people have probably never heard of, but they run most of the electricity wires around the East Coast, and there's a lot of issues that they're facing. So, yeah, I certainly think that this challenge needs a little bit more thought and a little bit more of a strategic response. The gas thing is important. What's really important, though, that Australians should understand, is that the national energy market operators have very clearly stated that if we're going to thunder on towards net zero targets the way we are going to be faced with blackouts on the East Coast.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
There's no question.
In fact, they actually earmarked the sort of suburbs that will be blacked out first. They call them brownouts, in South Africa, these intermittent sort of load shedding, to make sure that the load can handle it. It's absolutely insane. Yeah.
Yeah, and for those people that are not familiar with South Africa and what happens over there, you'll receive an email or you log onto the app.
Yeah, that's right. It's an app.
Yeah, and it will actually say to you, look, your power's going to be turned off between, 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock or, whatever it is, right? Now, not only is that terrible for households, because how do you keep your groceries cold if your fridge is off, right? You're going to go and buy ice bags or something. It's awful. How do you run a restaurant? How do you run a hospitality business?
Everyone needs their own generators.
Yeah. But even then, you try to run a generator, but there's a shortage of fuel. Yep. So, is this the Australia that we're looking forward to? And to me, what is the most heartbreaking about that? The Teals won those blue ribbon seats that if you'd have said 10 years ago, the Liberal Party aren't going to hold these seats, everyone laughed at you. Right? I mean, they took the killer. They took Bronwyn Bishop's area, Tony Abbott's area. Bronwyn Bishop, the Liberal Party, or that area voted the Liberals in after the whole Choppergate incident. And that's how blue ribbon that is.
Yeah.
So, to lose all of those teal areas, but largely some of them were lost because of a concern about climate change and a concern about our response. And centre-right political parties around the world have been really slow to respond to this with something sensible. Now, finally, Peter Dutton's starting to talk about it. I was surprised he didn't say anything about nuclear, because that is something that he's talked about in the past. So I was a little bit surprised that he didn't make a comment about that. I'll go to you for...
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I think this... Yeah, the campaign's well and truly kicked off. I mean, when it comes to what's happened with this particular speech, obviously he's trying to show the Liberals as, they're the best economic managers versus Labor. That's what he's trying to say, basically. Now, obviously, the devil's in the detail. I'd love to see the full report. I'd love to see the summary. And it'll be very good to see the questions he's asked, because I have no doubt that the ABC journalist, she will go hard like a pit bull, as she did with Jim Chalmers as well. But Albo is looking really good right now. He really is looking quite healthy with regards to how his campaign's going. And talk about a seamless launch. The way that they have executed this launch is absolutely brilliant. I didn't want a 3rd of May election. I didn't. I wanted a 17th of May election. So having 2 weeks less to campaign, less funding, less, whatever, this is not good. But check this out. This is the sort of stuff his campaign put out today, right after the actual announcement.
The ABC's interview.
That's what I thought. Oh, okay, good. Well, let's go over to him now.
Tax reform and tax cuts, but the Labor Party has racked up what we now see in the budget papers of about $1.2 trillion of debt. So we have to be realistic and understand the constraints that we've got. Now, the government put forward a plan which had relief for people who are really doing it hard now, which starts in 15 months. It's about 70 cents a day. Our plan is to reduce tax in another part of the family budget, and that, of course, is in relation to the halving of the fuel excise, which we think will be beneficial across the economy for pensioners and for uni students and for families running kids around and for small businesses. So we think there's better economic bang for the buck. And it's also not baked in as a structural spend in the budget.
And to be clear, so that's an absolute no for the campaign.
We have a great desire at some stage when we clean up Labor's mess, but we won't be able to provide tax cuts during this campaign. And I think, frankly, the Labor Party's LAW tax cuts are a bit of a cruel hoax on Australians.
Let me just ask you about the fuel excise, because recently you described that particular excise in 2023, and the Prime Minister quoted this in Parliament today. He said, you said that it was costly and able to be gamed by the oil giants. So was it Labor's surprise tax cut that changed your mind on this?
No, I think actually there's a great quote today around Jim Chalmers, who said it's fantastic for there to be relief at the Bowser for families. He said that 2 years ago. So
what about you, though?
The point, I guess I just make that context, that there are a range of views out there. That wasn't what the Treasurer was saying today. But what we've said, Sarah, is that we want to put in place the ACCC to monitor and to make sure that all of it's passed on. And to be honest, the experience when you look back to the Howard years, for example, but since then as well, where there has been a cut in the excise, it has been passed through to the consumer. And I think Australians who are pulling up at the Bowser tomorrow morning on their way to work or tomorrow afternoon on the way home and they're filling up, they know that next time they do it, if there's a coalition government, it'll be $14 or $15 cheaper than what they're paying.
How is that not, to use your words, an election bribe in the same way that you've accused the government of bribing voters on their tax cuts?
Because our benefit is now. It's not promised in 15 months' time. I suspect if the Labor Party...
I'll tell you how, and this is why I'm laughing. One's inflationary, one's not. One is like saying, I'll take less tax from you. One is saying, we will give you more of your money sort of back.
Yeah.
Rather than,
but it was a good question.
No, it was it's a cracker question, yeah. Like, you want hardball so you can crack it out of the park.
Re-elected, particularly given it can only be in a minority form with the Greens, that they end up walking away from some of these budget measures because they'll have to redo their budget.
But on your one, why doesn't that add up to being a bribe?
Well, it provides support to people now who are really hurting, and I believe that waiting 15 months is more about a political stunt. So if you accept, as I think all Australians must, that this has been a bad government and families and businesses are under pressure, they need that support now. And our argument is that this is the most efficient way to deliver that. And I think it will make a difference for families and for small businesses as well.
I think the answer you gave, Joel, was better than the answer Peter Dutton just gave.
Am I correct, though, or am I wrong? Like, am I showing my ignorance? That the money people would receive back, that the 70 cents a day, is that in the form of, all right, your taxes would be lower? Now, does that mean they've cut costs, basically, from the budget, and that's how that works?
Well, yeah, essentially, yeah. You're not paying as much in taxes.
Right.
That is correct.
Right. But you wouldn't feel that till the end of the tax year.
Well, what he's saying is that you'd feel it every time you go to the Bowser.
Yeah.
Right. But I thought your answer was better than actually the answer Peter Dutton just gave.
Yeah.
Right. I thought that his answer there looked a little bit shaky. Right.
Right.
More importantly, though, this is just me. Let's just be direct about things. Remember when the carbon tax was being proposed by Julia Gillard, right? And then she said that something along the lines of, somebody will fact check me and tell me I'm wrong, something along the lines of that they were going to give some sort of subsidy to every Australian family to make up for the carbon tax.
Yeah.
Oh, well, why introduce it then?
Yeah.
If you're only going to introduce it on corporations, then to do that, but it's still going to drive up our cost of living. So I guess my point here would be, if you think that it's going to save every Australian family $700 a year,
right,
why not just give them the $700?
Yeah.
Why cut the taxes? Just give them the money.
I just thought about why I said that. It wasn't because of the 75 cents, the 70 cents a day. It was actually because Peter Dutton and obviously what a lot of people are saying about the these Jim Chalmers sort of giving money out is they were more referring to the forgiveness of 20% of HEX debt and all these other inflationary things. And so I think I agree. I agree with you that my thing was actually better. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like it's like, yeah, our things are immediate relief. You know, theirs is inflationary. Ours is actually not taking the money to start with, basically.
I mean, this is what Milton Friedman talked about a lot, right? You have this sort of ever-growing government. He was obviously talking about the United States, but you've got this ever-growing government, and they create all this regulation and all this legislation, and then they give special treatment and carve-outs and all these different things to different people, and they say, oh, this is how you're going to save your money. If you want to give people more money, but you don't want to reduce taxes to do it, or give a special tax treatment, just give them the money.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to say, look, the fuel tax excise. To be clear, I'm not opposed to them reducing it.
Yeah,
right.
Me neither. They should.
But if your argument is we're going to do that because it's going to save the everyday Australian family $700 a year, why don't you just give them the $700?
Yeah.
Get the Reserve Bank to send everybody a check for $700.
Literally. Yeah. Anyways. How dare you use your brain, Shaquille? Sit down.
Your speech this evening, which is about gas, obviously a highly contested but very important area for the Australian economy. You've announced a national gas plan introducing gas reservation for the East Coast, as we just saw, 10 to 20% of East Coast gas from new fields and a price. You've named that price. When will we see gas at $10 a gigajoule?
We think by the end of the year is about the timing. So
by the end of this year?
Correct, of this calendar year. And that's something we've been working on with key figures in the gas industry on. And we've been doing months literally of work in relation to how this will work, because I think it's transformative for the economy. And as we know, energy is the economy, and it allows us, not just for consumers, but for businesses, for manufacturers, for food manufacturers, for farmers, etc., to reap a benefit from lower input costs. And it's not just about gas per se, of course. Gas is such an integral part in electricity production, and that's how we can help some of those price pressures in the economy.
Let's just get a few things clear about this. Are we talking about a gas reservation policy that applies to existing gas projects or only new gas projects?
So probably the most succinct way to explain it is that we honour our foundation contracts, so with our international partners, and that's important because it's a big export earner for us. But the gas that's sold beyond that, we want to divert between 50 and 100 petajoules back into the market, and that will fluctuate depending on the domestic need at the time, and it will increase supply. We don't want to temper demand. I mean, the Labor Party is tempering demand by closing down businesses and manufacturers who have moved offshore.
I just want to be absolutely clear about that. In relation to...
So it's gas in the market now, and our pledge is to bring more gas on more quickly. And we've announced, obviously, in relation to the West Coast, the market there, that we will extend the life of the important project there, which the Labor Party is refusing to do.
But no breaching of existing contracts in relation to our
existing foundation contracts. Yeah.
Now, in relation to the gas available for export, obviously this is gas that is used by very important partners of Australia, including the Japanese and the Koreans. Have you already spoken to them about the fact that there's going to be less gas available for them?
We have, and we've spoken to key players within the industry as well.
And how did they respond? I mean, sorry, the Japanese and the Koreans, for example.
Well, I'm not going to go into those conversations, but we've had a long-standing. No, we've had a long-standing relationship with the Japanese ambassador and his predecessors, and obviously other key players as well. We've been able to speak with, and we'll have more of those conversations. But I think they understand that there is a need for us to provide support to Australians, and Australian gas should be first and foremost for Australians, and it's an important export industry for us, and we're not going to disrupt those foundation projects. I think importantly also what they're asking of us, what they've asked of the government that hasn't been delivered yet, is assurances about the out years and the extension of those contracts. And that's the assurance that we can give with more supply in the system, and that gives them assurance within their domestic market.
Does that mean if the supply doesn't come on, that additional gas in the outer years is not secure for our foreign partners?
No, there's plenty of gas in the system, and there's plenty of gas that's discoverable. It's completely unacceptable that Victoria is going to spend $800 million on a gas terminal to import gas into Victoria in a country where we have an abundance of the natural resources.
Let me ask you about that, because you said you're going to build a pipeline. Where to, and where from, and where to?
Well, we'll work with the industry because there are capacity constraints at the moment, particularly heading north-south. Now, there's an argument about coming out of Darwin or coming west to east, and you've seen those proposals in recent weeks, but we say that we need more capacity in the system, that we've committed $1 billion to it. So it's not just capacity in the pipeline, but storage as well, so that we can get through peak periods, particularly in the southern markets.
So you're talking about a pipeline from the north of Australia.
We're talking where there are already
New South Wales.
Where we already have existing corridors, and those parcels of land and those pipelines are already identified.
Coming from where?
So,
could you just specify?
Well, again, we'll work with the industry to work that out, because it depends on what gas we can bring online. Narrabri in New South Wales, for example, is I think a project that's been delayed for a long time, and it will depend on where you can bring gas in from which part of the country, but predominantly you're going to be coming from Queensland. And I want to make sure that we can have a conversation with Victoria about discovering more gas there, because I think Victorians have had enough of their economy being destroyed by the Labor Party.
Let me just ask you this, because it's very important that any discussion about gas is anchored in facts and detail, because claims about what anyone's going to do in relation to gas just don't tend to work out. In relation to those fields where you say that you're going to be able to ramp up gas so quickly to reduce the price of gas by the end of this calendar year, how are you going to do that in the southern states where you've got Labor governments who are not in support of the policy that you've just put forward?
But Sarah, we've got capacity in the market now. So outside of the foundation contracts, gas that's being sold into the international market, that's the point I made tonight. So extra supply is incredibly important, and you make a good point. For some, it will take time to come on. I'm hoping that if there's a change of government in Victoria, and there's a very different conversation with business and even within the Labor government in Victoria about bringing more gas on. Peter Malinauskas, the South Australian Premier, is very keen to develop more in the mining space, because he knows that the South Australian economy is dependent upon it. So I think it's a different picture as you go across each of the states, but I want to be a Prime Minister that can see restoration of manufacturing in our country so that we can grow jobs and economic activity, and we'll work with the different state premiers to achieve that outcome.
Let me move on. You've also announced that you'll scrap the government's investment in the Rewiring the Nation project, that is money to build transmission lines to move green energy around the country. Will you, in doing that, renege on important existing contracts?
No, where we've got contracts in place, we're obviously first and foremost to honour those contracts. But
you've said you're going to cancel the fund. That fund has already got money put aside for those projects, one of which has already begun construction, others of which are expected. You're saying those are all secure? Yeah,
and the second point that I was going to make is that the beauty of our policy, where we bring nuclear into the system from 2035 and gas bridges the gap between now and 2035 to bring prices down, is that we don't have the distribution network requirements. So at a coal-fired power station now, there's already poles and wires obviously distributing the electricity that's generated into households and into businesses. The madness of Anthony Albanese's policy is that they need to create 28,000 kilometres of new poles and wires and to replace that which is there at the moment. It'll never happen, let's be frank about it. So yes, we need to put in some poles and wires, but not to the extent that Labor's talking about. And look, when you have a look at your electricity
So can you
bill,
just be clear about that?
Just let me make this point. When you have a look at your electricity bill and you see the network charges, you can see in there how much now that is making up of your bill. A lot of that is added to your bottom line electricity cost because of the renewable projects that the Prime Minister's got in place. Now, renewables are fantastic and they're needed in our system, but we can't pretend any longer that they can be 100% of the system.
Now, are you prepared to crater investment certainty in Australia as a green energy superpower?
If the Prime Minister's claiming that, I'd love to see the stats behind it, because investment is racing out of this country at a rate of knots. There's been a threefold increase in the closure of manufacturing businesses. Tomago is at significant risk of closure. Smelters in our country are talking about closing. Now, let's in Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen's world, we're going to pretend that we don't need aluminium in our society, in construction and across the building sector. It's nonsense. We are going to need it. And why would we export the jobs, increase the amount of emissions in production in Malaysia or somewhere else in the world? We should be supporting that industry. I want to revitalise that industry, and we can do that if we've got secure 24/7 permanent baseload power, which we can do I mean, Labor governments at the moment are extending coal-fired power stations because if not, the lights go out. But then there's gas, and we get more gas into the system, which is our announcement tonight, which brings pressure down off prices. And then we bring the nuclear into the system, which is exactly what Keir Starmer is doing in the United Kingdom.
Let me ask you a question about.
And I'll just finish. Sorry, I'll just finish on this point. China at the moment is building 29 nuclear power stations. We're the only country in the top 20 economies in the world not signed up to nuclear.
And making vast investments in renewable energy.
And building 2 coal-fired power stations a week.
Let me just ask you this question. Will the first budget, let's assume that you are successful in the coming election, will the first budget that you produce include the first expenditure on nuclear reactors?
Well, they'll include the expense that is required by law or by the budget rules to be included, and we won't change that. We won't deviate from what we had in government or what the government's now got in place.
You've started suggesting
it'll be properly accounted for. Just on the point of cost, again, it's a really important point because under our plan, we've had it independently costed by a company that has been used by the Labor Party in South Australia and the federal government, probably the most preeminent economist in the country, Frontier Economics, when it comes to energy policy modelling. They say that our system, our plan, is 44% cheaper than Labor. And the fact is that Labor's plan of renewables only is $263 billion more than what our plan costs. Now, that means cheaper electricity prices for consumers, and it will underpin the energy needs for our country for the next century.
Now, I want to move on to immigration. What's happened to your desire to set a figure for net overseas migration? Nothing in your speech this evening.
Well, we'll announce the non-figure in due course, but I'll just
what does due course mean?
Well, over the course of the next few weeks in the run-up to election day. But what we've announced is that we'll reduce the permanent migration intake by 25%.
Can you tell us how you're going to do that?
Well, we'll show you the composition and the breakdown of that again before the election. But Australians know that this government has brought in 1 million people over 2 years.
I'll just bring you back to that question because obviously time is getting short. How are you going to do that? How are you going to bring down
even some of our commenters have made that point. Let him speak. Yeah, well, I'm great with the hard questions, but let him speak. Literally. And she got in trouble for this once before. Remember, really? When he made the comment, "Look, you're a stooge for the Labor Party" or something. Remember that was like 18 months ago or last year or something.
Well, let's let him speak.
Workers, for example, who we want to attract. They deserve to bring their families with them.
Well, we'll prioritise what is in our country's best interest. We've got the greatest country in the world. Millions of people want to come here, and we've been a great beneficiary from the migrant story in our country. As Prime Minister, I want to talk more about the success of migration to our country, but I'm not pretending, like the Prime Minister is, that people are sleeping rough tonight because they can't find accommodation. I'm not pretending, like the Prime Minister is, that there are many millions of Australians, young Australians, older Australians, who are worried about either buying a house or their kids not being able to buy a house. I want houses for Australians first. We're going to build 500,000 more homes. We're going to provide support through stopping foreign buyers for 2 years from competing in auctions against Australian citizens. And we're going to make sure that people can achieve the dream of home ownership again. So the composition of the program will explain. But when Labor is bringing in likely more than 2 million people,
why can't you explain it? Why can't you? You've announced a target. Why can't you explain how you're going to do it?
He's explaining it if you bloody let him.
Because you keep jumping down his throat, woman.
Down of the numbers, but the point is
also he's not going to outlay a complex tax policy in a short timed interview where you're jumping down his freaking throat. You know, he's got. You know, election hasn't even been announced yet.
Can you imagine being married? I take it back.
Bring it down by 25%. It's at 185,000.
She's good at her job. She's good at her job.
We bring it down to 140,000 in years 1 and 2. It goes up to 160,000 by year 4. And what it does is it creates about 100,000 new homes, or frees up 100,000 homes for Australian citizens. I'm not going to tolerate a situation where young Australians have lost the dream of home ownership, which is the reality of this.
I just want to bring you to this statement from Jane Hume, and it goes to the previous questions about abolishing the government's investment vehicle for green energy and whether or not that makes Australia a bad place to invest. She said, when asked about the idea of scrapping investment vehicles like the HAF, which you've announced you're going to scrap, your Shadow Minister said it'd be hard to unwind because it could pose a sovereign risk. We're conscious of making sure Australia is seen as a good place to invest. Are you doing exactly what she feared, and that is sending a signal that Australia is not a good place to invest?
Well, Sarah, I was a minister in the Howard government. I was the Assistant Treasurer in the Howard government. I've been a senior minister in 4 administrations, and I've watched 7 prime ministers, good and bad. I have put budgets together, and I've worked very hard on the Expenditure Review Committee and the National Security Committee for a long period of time. I understand what we need to do to manage our economy effectively, and creating sovereign risk is not part of that. And we will look at the individual programs, but in a program where the government has spent money but not created a single new home for Australians.
Yes, but there are hundreds of houses that are being under construction at the moment. What happens to those houses?
That's the government's spin. They promised 1.2 million homes.
What happens?
They're 3 years into
let me
this
just.
government.
That's a question. What happens
Let
to
the man
Well,
finish.
freaking hell, what a great point. You know, they promised... It's great points.
houses that are currently under
Well,
construction?
they continue to construction. Of course they do, to completion. Of course they do. But let's be honest. The government promised 1.2 million homes. We're at the end of this term of government, 3 years in. How many homes built? Not one. Not one is built and occupied. It is a complete and utter outrage, and there'll be people watching tonight whose kids or grandkids can't get into a house.
Would it be fair? Would it be fair, Mr. Dutton, to acknowledge to the audience that policy was held up for a long time in the Senate by the Greens?
No, it'd be fair to point out that the government promised, like they did the $275 price reduction in electricity on 97 occasions before the election. It'd be true to say that it's another broken promise of the Albanese government.
Peter Dutton, you're about to enter into your first election campaign as leader. I want you to give me a single word that you think defines you that would be attractive to the voters.
Determined and dedicated for our country.
Voldemort.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Determined.
Thank you.
He gave you...
As we
I
head
hope you're proud of yourself. She looks very
to
proud of
federal
herself.
election,
Very
the
happy with
ABC
herself.
has been asking what's important to you before you go to the polls.
Yeah, that's why your chats are turned off, right?
Literally. Far out.
Hear your say.
Literally, yeah.
Like literally, the thing that's about to come up,
Yeah.
I've already seen it.
Thousands
yeah.
of you have
It
written
actually
into
comes
the
up and it
ABC
says,
to-
your say, or like,
Yeah.
all your say or something.
Yeah.
But the chat feature's turned off.
Have your say muted. Oh my gosh.
Especially curated have your
Yeah.
say. And there's going to be some footage for those of you that are, masochistic enough to now tune into the ABC and
Yeah.
watch this or re-watch this on
Yeah.
YouTube.
Yeah.
But there's some footage there of Albo next to Biden that comes up.
Are you serious? All right. Won my vote. Won my vote. All right, guys, check this out from Albo. And you tell me, and by the way, can I just say, that was Dutton is really good when he's under fire like that. They make him look really good because when you're the bad guy, he doesn't look so much like Voldemort, and he's actually very good on the. Don't laugh too much. He doesn't look too bad when it comes to the actual answers to these things. I feel like Albo, with that same level of scrutiny, couldn't talk that level of detail.
Well, he gets cranky too. I mean, he got cranky on that ABC radio interview. Remember, it was just fairly recently, the last few months. He got quite cranky.
Right.
The one thing I'll say about Dutton, and look, I'm not a Liberal Party stooge, but I've had the pleasure of meeting the guy a few times, and not just a handshake, but actually spending a little bit of time with him. 20 minutes, half an hour, that sort of thing. He's actually a much warmer person than what I ever thought he was. I was a bit surprised that he made comment during his speech, and he also referred to it while I was talking to this reporter. I'm sorry, I've forgotten her name. He made comment about his time as the Home Affairs Minister. And to be honest with you, I think I thought that it'd be best for him to distance himself from that.
Yeah, me too.
Because
A lot of immigrants are like, oh yeah, he's obviously a racist. That's the way they talk.
That was
because of that time.
That was his most unpopular time, and I think as well, like he talks about, look, I was a minister for this, and I had blah 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 blah. You just got to be a little bit careful. Like when he sits there and he says, I've been in politics for under 7 different prime ministers, some are good, some bad. I'm 41 years old. I just turned 41 in December, right? ScoMo is the first prime minister since I was old enough to vote that served out his whole term. Albo was the second. Now, when there was so much turmoil in the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years, right? the Liberal Party said that they were going to be a more stable government. And what did we get? We got Abbott and then Turnbull and then ScoMo. Like,
Great.
I've actually, in my whole adult life, ScoMo and Albo, the first and second Prime Ministers, have actually served their terms. So, sitting there and saying that you've been in politics, basically, for as long as I've been old enough to vote, I'd like you to talk about some real-world experience, which he doesn't have. He's a politician. I'm not going to go too off at him for that. But, it's just something to note, that you need to go around the country. You need to talk to people.
Yeah.
I do think that...
He did say he served 9 years as a police officer, though.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's another government job. And
I think that's pretty real, though. I mean, you're dealing with people with police work. It's not exactly, fun.
Well, I won't get into my thoughts and feelings on police, but look, during COVID, I'll just say this: during COVID, sure. the police were the arm of the government, right? They allowed protests to go on if it was for the right political reasons, and they threw people to the ground if it was for the wrong political reasons. And they went and arrested pregnant women in their apartments for suggesting they should have a protest. To me, it doesn't matter whether you agree or don't agree with the protesters' position. The fact of the matter is that this is what they were. This is what the police were doing. So
yeah,
and so I have some grave reservations about policing, but it's also another government job.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's compare these two men. And again, guys, the reason why we are even talking about Dutton, even in a slightly positive way, is because, first off, we're realists. We actually want to be like, all right, let's honestly assess this guy, who he is, what his policies are, how is he being handled well, or are they basically, just setting him up to fail? But, those turtles look so cute. But most important, sorry, guys, distracted by the ABC. But most importantly, at the end of the day, in the lower house, we are either going to have Labor or Liberal. It's either going to be Dutton or it's going to be Anthony Albanese, that is the Prime Minister. So that is what we're comparing for these particular budgets. I will say, though, Pauline Hanson did come out with a 20-minute budget reply as well, which I won't play for you tonight because I think it's getting late already. But just to compare the two leaders, check out this ad from Anthony Albanese. This came out about 30 minutes after that post was leaked or scheduled or accidentally got posted on Twitter. Check this out from Anthony Albanese, and you tell me how you feel about the guy.
Over the last 3 years, we've faced a lot of challenges, and we've achieved a lot together. We delivered a tax cut for every taxpayer, an energy bill relief for every household. Medicare is stronger with cheaper medicines, more bulk billing and urgent care clinics open right across the country. Unemployment is down, real wages are up and inflation has more than halved. Australians are studying for free at TAFE and we wiped billions in student debt. We have started the biggest ever housing bill and we have made childcare cheaper for every family. We've taken action on climate change. And as the first government with the majority of women, we've put gender equality at the heart of every decision. We're going to keep fighting for you because now is not a time for cutting and wrecking. It's a time for building Australia's future. Together.
All right, I have to admit, guys, when I saw that, I thought that was very sharp video editing. Now, look, he might be full of crap on all of that stuff. If you actually fact check the guy, he's catfishing.
He's catfishing.
But boy, that it really does get your blood pumping in terms of the way that video was put together, and it makes you feel something. And it's like, but
the thing is, I don't think it does. I really don't think it does. Hey, let me tell you why. Great music. It was a great ad. It really was a great ad. If 50% of what was in that ad was true, I might be sitting here saying, you know what? I'm still not going to vote Labor.
Yeah.
But I get it. I get why other people will, because he's done, a reasonable job. But he hasn't. I mean, the ABC, of all places, right-wing ABC, came out, I think it was about again, 18 months, 2 years ago. I can't 100% remember. And they said there were people, especially older people, and I brought this up on another show, I think, when Stephen Pettis was here. There are people who don't have enough to eat, who are waiting to get into community housing, right? I know it's a state issue, but they've got 15-year wait lists in some times. They're relying on food banks. Now the food bank prices are higher than the supermarket prices, right? And they're skipping meals in order to feed their cats and dogs. And the community services people said to them, well, maybe give up your pet cat, your pet dog. You're going to say to some 70 or 80-year-old widow, give up your only companionship? Like what the hell? This is what's happened under Labor. So, what's the old saying? Don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining, right? And that's what I feel this campaign is. And I know the polls are showing that it'll probably be a Labor minority government, but I really hope that Australians don't want to see Albo in there again, because he's done a disgraceful job, in my opinion.
They don't.
And if you're going to vote for independence, do that, but please preference Liberals or Labor at some point. Now, I would hope that you would preference Liberals, but
yeah,
the guy hasn't done a good job.
You're not going crazy. You're not going crazy. You are absolutely right. People are rejecting Labor, but they're getting the minor parties. That's the problem. They don't understand how the preference system works. And we are the only country in the world that basically has this preferential thing. So it's a uniquely Australian problem. So when I diagnose this as a big problem, that when we have a referendum, it's a simple yes, no to a single question, we smash it out of the park, 60 to 70%. But when it comes to something like as a complex as the preferential voting system, and on top of that, when you get a Liberal Party that is so close to Labor versus the Freedom Party policies, that's where it just splinters and goes everywhere. And that's why it was a very safe bet for me back in October to be like, Labor minority.
That was a big issue where I actually had to move I'll be honest with our audience, I actually had to move my microphone all the way over there. So if you heard a few noises while we were watching his response, it was when he said, there's a clear difference in this election between us and them. It's like, no, there really isn't. And that's the thing that's upset me the most about the Liberal Party. And it's not just this election, it's previous elections as well. What's upset me the most is I feel, and I don't know if I can speak for other Liberal national voters, I feel and have felt for many years taken advantage of by them. I feel like, I can't vote for the Labor Party, so I'm going to vote for you, but yet you're not actually dealing with the issues that I want you to deal with.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And his metadata rules, under Senator Conroy, like all these things, like just, and now you got this misinformation bill.
Yeah.
And didn't their opposition communication minister say, it doesn't go far enough?
Not doing it funny.
Like, and the bill got defeated. Thank heavens, because the Greens.
Praise the Lord.
Saved us.
The Greens and the Teals. They found a conscience. So thank God, the guardians of democracy.
Oh yeah, brilliant.
Absolutely brilliant.
But this is precisely the issue.
Yeah.
We need to have a proper opposition party. I've said this before. I think I said it again on Tuesday. I've said it on other shows. I'm a reasonably moderate kind of guy, right? So I'm. People always say I'm a right winger and I'm a conservative. It's not that I'm upset at being called a conservative. I just think it would be a disservice to conservatives because I'm not. I can't represent their views.
The left have just gone way too far.
Exactly.
All that's happened.
But moderate Australians are sick and tired of all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Absolutely sick and tired of it.
Right.
Well, one of our viewers made a comment earlier about talking about gas. There's a lot of gas in Canberra. That was another time that I had to move my microphone away because
the audience are funny. They got some zingers, don't they?
But that's the whole thing. I mean, we're so frustrated with the government, and I just feel, throughout my life and having travelled to many countries around the world, that the countries I go to where there's less government, where there's less rubbish that you have to put up with and less loopholes and hoops that you've got to jump through, the better you are.
No, for sure.
Right? The more freedom you've got.
100%.
And I don't think that they realise the damage that they do. One of the things I was a bit disappointed with in Peter Dutton's response there was he talked about, electricity and gas and, I think he mentioned coal there for a little bit. He talked about a lot of different things, but he only briefly mentioned how many small businesses have gone under.
Yeah.
Right? On my way in here to the studio, there's a place around the corner. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but they have $2 oysters. And I was thinking about these 70 cents a day, and I thought, yeah, you get 1/3 of an oyster. That's basically the savings that the Labor Party's offering you.
Yeah.
People are struggling, people are hurting. COVID was horrible. People suffered all over the world. Right? I'm not gonna start pointing fingers at various politicians over the handling of that to any great degree. But that was 5 years ago.
It was 2020. I can't believe it.
It's 5 years ago.
I know. I've literally grown up on camera. It's been bizarre.
So, surely we can do better. And I really feel like the Labor Party has not done that.
No.
And if the Liberal Party loses this election, which they may well lose, I don't want them to.
I'm putting my money on it. In fact, the betting markets are saying that now.
I know.
They've finally caught up.
I know.
I could have made some. Look, I'm not a betting man.
I am,
because when I've tried in the past, my card gets cancelled because they're like, you're not a betting man. And so with me, you could have made some serious money if you made the bets based on my predictions back in October. But here we are. I think it was like a 3-fold return on a Labor minority.
Yeah.
But look, who knows? I might be dead wrong.
Look, and you're the most knowledgeable person about Australian politics that I know.
Big nerd.
But I hope you're wrong. I really do. I hope something happens over the next month.
Yeah. I don't want to see people suffer.
But if they do lose, you can't blame the voters. And because he might get 30% of the vote again. One third of Australia again would turn into New Zealand. You can't blame the voters, and you can't blame the Labor Party because they won. Yeah. You have to blame the Libs and the Nats. You have to. And the primary thing is, look, I think a couple of months ago when the polls were showing that Dutton was the preferred PM, I think that if the election was called right then and there, he absolutely would have won. But since then, they've thrown up very little opposition to the things that Australians actually care about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the polls in some cases showed that Australians overwhelmingly were in support of some things or opposed others. And the Liberal Party did the opposite. And then this recent thing where the Liberal Party and the Labor Party voted in this donation rule. You'll have to explain this to the audience for minor parties.
Come in at the next election after this one,
way to go, guys! That's awesome.
Really, stamping out democracy.
That's such a good idea because there's so many Liberal. I've been a lifelong Liberal Party voter, but it's been the last few elections that I've voted for minor parties first and then preferenced Liberal Party. And since Stephen Pettis and you informed me that when you don't put them number one but you put them number two, it costs them the $3.50 or whatever it is that they get in electoral funding.
Getting up to $5 now.
$5? I'm like, yes.
Hang on.
I'm absolutely taking the money off them.
$5 for the lower house and $5 for the upper house, roughly.
Right.
Roughly speaking, if they get above 4%.
Yeah. So I'm like, I'm absolutely taking the money off them.
Yeah.
And I'll give the money to who I was told. I moved to Sydney when I was 11 from Perth, 10, 11, 12, something like that. I moved from Perth to Sydney, and I was always told that Pauline Hanson was this racist psycho, right? I'll tell you what, I'd rather she gets me $5 than the Libs or the Nats.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or Christian Family First, or, many of the other parties. I'm going to give them the $5 first.
Yeah.
And now they've changed these rules in relation to donations. So what you're going to do is all the people that are already unhappy with you, they'll still preference you, but they're unhappy with you, and now even more pissed off with you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. What a brilliant strategy. Magnificent.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I tell you what, if you guys really want, I mean, I do actually have Pauline's speech, which I'll get to in a second. But what I wanted to firstly just make a point of, a couple things. Yes, Shaquille, Dutton was winning the polls a few months ago. But even if the election was then for sake, or even if it was better, at the end of the day, the electorate isn't asking about Dutton versus Albo. It's being asked which of the party names in front of you, with random names next to it that they've never heard of, are you going to vote for? And then number it from 1 to 6 or whatever. That's the problem. And so that's why I'm dedicated to sort of voter education and actually helping people's vote count. But also, so the real question is, it's like, okay, Joel, so you knew what was going to happen in October. What happens after that? They have to cull Dutton. So I said this back then. I said the problem is that Liberals are going to be like, see, we told you, Dutton is not electable. So within the Liberals, they will blame the loss on Dutton. They will say, we therefore have to go even more left. That's exactly what happened in Victoria. That is exactly what happened in Victoria, and then they lost again to Dan Andrews. That's the problem. That's where things are going.
They didn't do that with Abbott, though, did they?
They did go left.
Tony
No,
Abbott,
they did. Yeah, absolutely.
No, because Tony Abbott, Julia Gillard had a minority government, right? And he stayed as the opposition leader, and then went into the next election. So there's a chance that Pete Dutton could.
But no, but hang on a sec. He made significant gains. Dutton's not going to make gains. Labor's going to lose some seats. Dutton may gain like 3 seats, and then the crossbench is going to get larger. It's going to take a few off the left, a few off the right. That's what's going to happen. That's the problem, and it doesn't bring me any joy. But that's where I see things going. But
the reason it's going that way is because the two major political parties, or the coalition, and Labor, both have visions that I don't think resonate with the Australian people. And that's the reason why people are looking for alternatives. I think, as I said, I think if Peter Dutton does win, it's because people are going to be wanting to vote Albo and the Labor Party out, right? I don't necessarily think it's because it's because they're in love with Dutton. I think it's because you can tell people, yeah, things are awesome. Look at all these great things. We did this and we did that, blah, blah. But you're catfishing everybody by doing that. Australians have suffered over the last handful of years, and much of that suffering has happened under Labor. Labor promised to do things differently. It hasn't happened. So that's it'll be more of a Labor loss than a Liberal win, in my personal opinion. And as I keep saying, Peter Dutton, he comes across as a very sort of, He's a politician. His remarks are, whilst they're well scripted and then he's pretty fast. Like in the interview, he handles his own. He comes across as a politician.
He does. No, he
does.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a really big human side to him, and if he can just show that human side of him a little bit more, right? He made mention of his wife
watching maths
earlier, and talk about your family. Talk about everyday things.
Well,
you remember ScoMo? He went to the footy, and he wasn't up in a private box, which is where snobs like me end up in. He was like down there with like normal people, right? So, like that sort of thing, like that. If Peter Dutton could do that, I think that could bring him across the line.
I'm telling you, the man's being set up to fail. And that's the thing. Look, here comes the conspiracy theorist. This is really happening within the Liberals. What's going on is we're seeing a situation where Peter Dutton's own internal staff and party want him to lose. They want him to lose. They want to cull the Conservatives out of the Liberal Party completely. This is what they do time after time. They did it after the last federal election. They said Scott Morrison is too right-wing. He's unelectable. So what they did when they wrote after the election, Why did Scott Morrison lose? It's because he had a woman problem. The captain's picks wasn't enough. Even though they ran over the members' rights in New South Wales and in 13 seats in New South Wales, they didn't give the members a vote. They selected 13 women. It was a top-down approach, captain's picks. Only 12 of those women ended up... only all 12 out of the 13 lost those seats. And the problem we've got is the left faction and the Liberals, they want Dutton to lose, because if he loses, they then are justified internally taking out the Conservatives. They're more concerned about the factional battle. Then they think that next time around in 2028, their guy or girl will become the Prime Minister. But they are mistaken. They are mistaken. What's going to happen is exactly what happened in 2022 November in Victoria in the state election. But can I just say, as doom and gloom as this is, guys, I need to explain a very clear concept about this with Dutton. Yes, I want him to go want him to go further. Yes, he is better than Albo, but marginally better. And when it comes to the Parliament of Australia, this is a very important concept. The reason why I talk about this thing called the balance of power is what you can actually insert some steel into the spine of Dutton. This is the Parliament of Australia on Wikipedia. You can insert some steel into his spine in both the lower house and the upper house by having this crossbench. So Labor currently, they don't need anyone in order to pass bills in the lower house. They got 78. But that's about to change. They're about to lose a few. So they're going to need some Greens and Teals and maybe some Muslim independents, take your pick, to pass bills. Now, in the upper house, similarly, they do currently need the Green senators and David Pocock in order to pass bills, and Jackie Lambie, the saviours of democracy and free speech. Now, what happens? What happens is when you have a situation that Dutton gets close enough to form government, but not majority, he then requires some crossbenchers. Now, if those crossbenchers are some of the Freedom parties, you can force him to go to his party and say, hey, I can't pass this without Pauline or the Libertarians or Rennick's help. We have to compromise and insert these clauses into the bill so that it's better. That is exactly what I'm talking about. And that is exactly how the left, the Greens and the Teals have gotten so far with what they've been trying to do. Shaq, what do you think? Should we play Pauline's...
I think we should. Just while you're looking that up, I'll just make a quick point. But Pauline Hanson's got these cartoon things which are really amusing, and you know she actually in one of the videos she showed everyone coming into the city, and David Littleproud was one of the people that she picked on, right? That's the thing. Look, if you're the Nationals, like, you need to go right, dude. Like, you're looking after the farmers, right? Now, I grew up under Bob Hawke was actually the Prime Minister when I was born, but I don't really remember him that well. Paul Keating was the first Prime Minister that I really remember watching, and I thought that he was a brilliant parliamentarian, but I was like 8 years old and I had no idea what he was talking about. Just thought he was, pretty suave, and he had great suits, and he just, gave great speeches. What I think the Liberal Party forgets is there's the liberal side of the Liberal Party, which I think is, people like myself, and there's a conservative side. Yes, we may have some disagreements, right? But if you move to the right, on most issues, people like myself will still back you. It's very, very rare that someone like me is going to go, oh, I'm really unhappy about that, right? I was really unhappy when Alan Jones said, with Liberal Party, high-ranking Liberal Party people around them, that Julia Gillard's father died in shame. Right? I was embarrassed to be a Liberal Party or to be a Liberal supporter, because that was a comment that I think should never have been made, no matter how much you disagree with somebody else's politics. Right? I think that's disgraceful. But moving to the right, you're still going to get my support. Okay? This thing with deregistering the CFMEU, here you've got Victorian Labor that wants to have pink carriages on the trains only for women, to look after women, I actually made this comment to one of our commenters on YouTube. Like, where are their priorities? Do they even know what a woman is? Right? Is that the reason why it's perfectly okay to bash a woman, and the Labor Party says nothing about it?
Yeah.
Says absolutely nothing about it. Julia Gillard's most famous speech is the misogyny speech that she gave. Now, she had, in my personal opinion, she actually had a lot of material with which she could have used that speech for. She could have delivered that speech and it had been really powerful and had been really, really meaningful. But she delivered that speech in support of Peter Slipper. After allegations of sexual misconduct, she gave that speech. She used all of that ammunition to support Peter Slipper after trying to convince the Australian people that Harry Jenkins, wasn't it? Had stood down just randomly, and it had nothing to do with the fact that she needed the extra vote, right?
I was like in year 8, so I can't.
So okay, well, so I'm sure somebody here will fact check me, but it was something along those lines. But like, why would you use all that ammunition to in support of Peter Slipper? Like, really?
Honourable.
Is this like? Are we being serious?
Yeah.
And this is the thing. So I really hope that Australians can see through this. And I do look at the US and I see that a lot of young people in the United States are quite. What's the term now? The opposite of woke is based. Is that the term that
wow
our generation's using?
Skibbity.
I'm coming up. I'm coming up to speed with these things.
Yeah, absolutely. They're Sigma males.
But what we've noticed is that in the very young generation, sort of the under 25s, is that males are moving away from all of this so-called woke stuff. Yeah. So, look, as much as I respect your opinion, and you've always been right, and I've always been wrong, even about Virginia in the last election.
Yeah,
I got that one wrong. But I do hold out some hope that Albo's going to be gone, because I don't think Australians are going to buy that. Hey, give them another 3 years to achieve what they didn't achieve in the last 3 years, because in the last 3 years they were on the way to achieving it. I don't think Australians are going to buy that. I think Australians are going to go, no, actually our lives were made miserable in the last 3 years.
That's not what people are voting on, though.
What do you think people are voting on?
They're voting on, okay, I see a logo, do I recognise it? And then their real reaction. That's what it is. It's so low information. It's so sad. Campaigners, candidates, parties, they spend so much time crafting an image. And then when you see, if you ever handed out a how to vote card, if you ever actually talk to someone that's not in it like me, and they don't, it's astonishing on what basis people make their votes up. And so even if they get it, even some of the people that watch this show, I'm always shocked by the fact that when they number a how to vote card, they'll be like, oh, I did Liberal Party 1, and then I did Pauline Hanson. Pauline, I put you number 2 because I want to support you in Queensland. And she's just like, I needed you to put me 1, then Liberal. But I said, I didn't want to split the vote. You don't split it; it flows.
Yeah, I get that. I totally get what you're saying. The question is, how many people are going to vote Labor 1 or 2 or 3? Right? I just feel like Australians are going to look at the last 3 years and look at the rest of the world, especially the United States, under Trump, which is becoming a little bit more contentious in the media. Yep. But look at what's happened there. Look at how Keir Starmer's run the UK, right? Macron, I don't know if anyone noticed, but while Dutton was giving his response, there was stuff coming up, like underneath the sort of the things coming up underneath, and Macron says, "Oh well, if European forces entered the Ukraine, that could
be a deterrence against
Russia.
Yeah, astonishing thing to say, isn't it?
Gee, well, it took you a few years, didn't it, France, to sort of get your act together, and you're one of the Security Council members as well. Like, I feel like, you look at Germany, which has moved significantly towards the right. You look at immigration, which is a huge issue. And, I met a lot of people in my life. My parents immigrated to this country. Many of my family members immigrated to this country or to the US or to Canada or to the UK and a lot to New Zealand. I'm not anti-immigration.
Yeah.
Right? I love people to come and try and have a better life. But there has to be a limit, and the country has to be able to absorb those people, and those people have to be able to assimilate into our culture.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
We can't have, protests saying the most vile things outside of the Opera House, one of the most iconic buildings in the world. Even if you actually agree, that Israel, has maybe gone too far.
Yeah.
In what they've done as a response to October 7.
Yeah.
To sit there and say, kill the Jews, F the Jews, gas the Jews.
Yeah.
How can that be chanted at the front of the Opera House?
It's ridiculous.
Right? And the police are sitting there and didn't say a bloody thing.
No, they said in fact, they said we couldn't shut it down. There were too many of them.
Yeah. So honestly, I really do feel like, and you made a comment just before about Muslim independence.
Yeah.
I don't know any Muslims that are like out there saying, like I think it's brilliant that we introduce transgenderism into like kindergartens. You know what I mean? Like they're conservative people. So something's gone wrong, and what's gone wrong is the Liberals mostly and Nat's policy. And I hope you're wrong. I really do. I hope you're wrong, and I hope that Australians are just going to say, you know what, I cannot possibly put up with another 3 years of Albo.
Yeah, look, I was trying to pull this up basically. So this is the best thing. So this shows preference flows, Jack. So when it comes to what is it? So when it comes to your vote, when there's various parties that are running, basically, let's say there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, there's 6 parties running in this particular seat. This is the seat of McMahon. This is a real seat. This is real data. So in the last election with Scott Morrison, when he ran against Anthony Albanese, this is Chris Bowen's seat, by the way. We saw a situation where Chris got 47% of the vote, the first vote. Then Liberals got 28% of the vote. The United Australia Party got 9%. And the Greens got almost 6%. One Nation almost got 5.5%. And then the Libertarians got about 3.3%. So the way it works is whoever gets the least amount of votes, they get taken off and their votes get split because obviously all the numbers go everywhere. Now look at how few votes actually went to the Libs after this. And this is where it shows you. So once you remove the first count and it all flows, some go to Labor from the Libertarians, some go to the Liberals, some go to the United Australia Party, some go to One Nation, and then some go to even the Greens. Look what happens when the Greens get eliminated.
Who is a Libertarian voter who then preferences the Greens?
Exactly. It gets worse. It gets worse.
Am I on planet Earth? Or
this happens. And this is the thing. If you look at enough of these, this happens. So then you've got the Greens right here. They got eliminated next. Look at the efficiency of that transfer rate straight to Labor, bolstering them up past the majority, delivering them that win. People see the Greens or the Liberals that they see it as a protest vote, voting for the Greens or an independent, but it flows back to Labor before it gets to the Libs. Then some of it goes to the Libs, some of it goes to the UAP, some of it goes to One Nation. I mean, what Greens voter is preferencing One Nation and the UAP? That's another question.
Yeah.
One Nation then gets removed. One Nation voters are going to Labor as much as are going to Liberal once One Nation is eliminated. Look at that. And then obviously the bulk of it going to the UAP. And then when the UAP is left, look how many votes get sent to One Nation, like 40%. from the UAP once it's left, and then that's the problem. So what happens is with the left-wing parties when they run, and I've got plenty of these, they are more efficient. Their version of the UAP, the Greens Party, the amount of votes that flow to Labor is much higher. That's the problem that's going on here. And so when I do how to vote cards, it's not because Joel's a shill for the Libertarian Party or one of the 8 other freedom parties. It's because we've got to fix this problem. Because if you don't fix it, this keeps happening. And because the vote's split, 15% of the vote is split across so many parties, this is the problem we face. And that's why I pull my hair out with... and that's why I was so confident in October what was going to happen. I was like, all right, we're not doing anything different. We're just going to rerun the previous 8 elections that we fought. Well, this is what's going to happen. And that's why it's not even risky to me.
Yeah, look, again, I don't doubt you. And you know, when we first met, I remember a few times that you've come over to my house and you've shown me data, and I just sit there astonished. I don't get it.
Yeah.
Like, look, there was a question that came up before, or something that you might have said. Hopefully, I'm not saying so in confidence, that the Governor General is a Republican, that believes that we should be a republic. I believe that we should be a republic as well, and I don't actually understand why republicanism is on the left.
Yeah,
like I really think it should be a right wing issue that you know, like Americans, where like, hey, we want to be in control. That it shouldn't be somebody's birthright, even if it's by proxy with a Governor General, to veto our Parliament. That should be something that we, the people, decide. Like, to me, that sounds like a right wing position.
Yeah,
and very few of my conservative friends agree with me actually on that. And I respect that. I also understand it. But I can't understand how you could vote for One Nation and then go to the Greens or the Labor Party. I don't get it.
Because they're low information, Jack. They're low. They don't. And this is the problem. When you don't have a proper ground game, where people are literally like handing out how to vote cards and saying, "Yep, this how to vote card has 1 Freedom Party, 2 Freedom Party, 3 Freedom Party, 4 Liberal, 5 Labor, 6 Greens," when you're not having people on the polling booths because we're not rallying the troops doing that, people will make it up themselves. They will donkey vote. They'll number it 1 to 6 just in order. They just throw their vote away, and their vote is equivalent to yours and mine. That's the problem. And it's mandatory voting. It's mandatory voting. Whereas when you get a very simple proposal, yes or no, and you just do that, done. We're done.
But the one I guess downside to what you're proposing with you know, the sort of citizen initiated referendums or what America calls ballot initiatives, like we should have that on a really at the next election, right? The problem is that you end up with direct democracy, and I think as a person who believes in republicanism, I sort of explained this to people who are maybe a bit confused about what I'm saying. I believe that the people should ultimately be able to choose, but I believe that government power should be constrained so that you're, as an individual, not going to be overrun by the tyranny of the majority. So Albo actually said something which was quite interesting on an interview that he was doing with the US media, I think. And he said, well, you know, I'm a Democrat, and obviously to be a Democrat, you have to be a Republican. It's something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing him incorrectly. Right, and that is correct. You do. If you are a Democrat, you have to be a Republican, in my opinion. But you don't have to be a Democrat in order to be a Republican. So I'm just making that distinction. It's a technical kind of distinction.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think we don't need to be Switzerland where we have, you know, referendums on everything. But when there are clear things that are you know, an issue, I know a lot of people, you know, again, friends of mine, that are going to vote for Albo, that are going to vote for the Labor Party. I even know a few people that are going to vote for the Greens, who actually say to me, we don't want to have the immigration levels that we've got. or we think they're dealing with climate change incorrectly.
Yeah.
Right? So they feel as though they have to vote that way because that's the closest representation they've got, but it's not actually what they want.
No.
And I feel like it's the same thing on the other side. Liberal and National voters and Freedom Party voters who don't necessarily agree with everything, but they feel like this is as close as they can get. So my view is that maybe if they could actually, you know, be able to say, okay, yes, I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote for the Labor Party, but I don't want more immigration. I want immigration to be reduced, right? Or I'm going to vote for the Liberal Party, but I want immigration to be increased. Goodness knows why, but you know, that they should be able to actually have a real say in what they want. Yeah. And at the moment, it appears to me, and again, I'm going to pick on my own side because who else is going to? We have to pick on our own side. The Liberal Party and the National Party have had enormous support for certain things, and they've gone against us. And the disinformation bill is a classic example of that, right? We don't want it. Why would you come out? Why would you, Shadow Communications Minister, come out and say, oh, it hasn't gone far enough? Why would you do that?
Yeah.
You know, that's just one of many examples. The handling of COVID. Why wouldn't you, if ScoMo had have come out and said, look, we're going to change the rules so that you will never be forced to be vaccinated or have a medical treatment that you don't want, right? He may actually have won the election. Probably wouldn't have. But, you know, he may have. Like, the Liberals may have romped in and then he would have been replaced. But, you know, they're not responding to what we're telling them. Like, we're screaming as loud as we can and telling them that this is what we want, and they're just not doing it.
It's insane. I think it was Professor Flint in my interview yesterday, and I might be getting this slightly wrong, but he said 80% of the federal budget, so 80% of the expenditure in this country by government is by the federal government. And the 20% that is for the states, the federal government has a lot of input as to how that's done. Something along those lines. But look, I look at what's going on in the country. The problem is we had a referendum a year and a half ago, a referendum that only the ACT voted yes for. We need more direct democracy. Don't get me wrong, there's a big problem with the tyranny of the majority, but the bulwark against that is the Senate. The Senate is meant to be the bulwark because each state has the equal amount of senators, even if it's Tasmania. And so the big problem we've got is there's actually not enough citizen-initiated referendums. All we're getting is this Canberra bubble. They're the only ones that can put up a proposal. There's no like, oh, if you can get 20% of the population or the electorate, or maybe 10% of the electorate, to sign a petition, put their address in and whatever, and then put in a proposal and get behind that petition to trigger a referendum at a federal level, there's none of that. You know, back in the day, we used to have like 11 referendums. So when you'd go to the election, you'd vote on just like 11 different questions. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Bam, bam, bam. Too easy. Perfect.
Yeah.
Like...
Yeah, and I think we should probably, you know, go back to a model like that. We should be... But people should be able to have a say. And as I said, that may mean... And look, I don't get it. I don't get why you would vote for Albo again, because I think, you know, most people's lives have been made worse under his leadership. But if you are going to vote for Labor and for Albo, but you don't like, you know, A, B, and C, then you should be able to say so. And that should be like something that Parliament has to actually deal with. Unfortunately, you know, that just really hasn't happened.
No.
So, and you're right, the Canberra bubble, and even the Northern Territory. You know, the mass media was telling us, you know, after Ray Martin comes out and calls us all dinosaurs and dickheads, you know, they come out and say, oh, the Northern Territory vote's not going to count as much and blah, blah, blah. Even they voted against it.
Yeah.
Right? So,
yeah, that's right.
You know, the majority, but from what I understand, the majority of Aboriginal communities voted against it. And why? Because you don't want to centralise power. You don't want, you don't want to have to rely on people sitting in Canberra and academics and politicians to sort things out for you.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of a single politician that's in Parliament today that I could say, hey, look, I'm going to set up a business tomorrow and I'd really love for you to come and work for it, right? You don't see any politicians leave politics and go and work for a small business. Right, they all become consultants for these big, massive multinationals.
For AUKUS, which they set up.
It's just
literally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, feathering their own bed. Look, what do you reckon, Shaq? Should I play Pauline's 20-minute budget, or is that for another time?
No, absolutely play that. I'm just going to make one quick comment though.
Shoot.
I think one of the most effective ads that they ran in the Trump-Kamala Harris campaign was. She's for they, them, and he's for you, right? Yeah. And and Dutton kind of co-opted that. I'm not sure if anyone else saw it, but he said, "This is about saving Albo, not about you." Right. You know what, Liberals? Run on that. Seriously, run on that one. This is about saving Albo. This is not about you and your family.
No.
Run on that, because that could be quite a powerful message. Make that part of your advertising campaign.
Guys,
let's see our favourite friend, Pauline Hanson.
Absolutely. Guys, I'm going to play Pauline's budget reply now. I figured now's the best time to do it. Otherwise, it's literally just going to go up and there'll be no commentary from me and it's going to be like, oh, this is a paid promotion. This is the opposition's budget, and Pauline is a part of that opposition by being in the Senate. And her gin is behind me. Pauline Hanson's Please Explain Gin. So,
which, by the way, I've
tried a bit. Have you?
I have tried a bit. It's actually not too bad. It's quite enjoyable.
No, absolutely.
Not tonight.
Not tonight. Not tonight.
Several months ago.
That's right. Yeah, guys. Here you go. This is Pauline Hanson. I'll let her take it away.
Well, we heard the Albanese-Chalmers fourth budget delivered since they took government in 2022. Well, this is my response to their budget. So here we are in Canberra, probably the last time for the coming federal election for budget week. We weren't even sure a budget would be handed down this year, but already had a fair idea of what would be in it. A return to deficit on the back of increased spending, increasing debt, election sweeteners and election traps, and no genuine spending or tax reform. Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, who has never run a business or been employed in the private sector, his entire life has delivered exactly what we expected. Government spending has increased to $786 billion. Gross debt is now over $8 trillion, rising to $1.2 trillion in just 3 years. There's some sweeteners, like more energy rebate money. There's an election trap for the coalition, a tax cut worth less than a cup of coffee a week that will still cost the budget $17 billion. There's no attempt at genuine spending reform, no waste cutting, and no tax reform. It's just more of the same, digging Australia deeper into an abyss with no attempt to address the causes of our housing and cost of living crisis. There's very little to address our growing deficiencies in defence. There's heaps of exclusive funding for Indigenous corporations, again with no accountability for closing the gaps. There's not much in the way of new infrastructure funding and nothing for true nation building. There is no provision for paying off our increasing debt. In summary, it's just another big spending Labor budget that squibs the opportunity for real reform. It's disappointing, but predictable. It's time for some real change. It's time for One Nation's plan.
Yeah.
One Nation's plan focuses on spending reform that is urgently needed and long overdue. It's spending reform that is now beyond the capabilities of Labor and the coalition. The last time we had a glimmer of responsible economic management was during the Howard years. By 2006, Australia's net debt had been virtually eliminated by the Howard government. After that, we had 6 years of Labor with Wayne Swan and his constant promises of a surplus that were never realised, and Australia was again $270 billion in net debt. Then we had 9 consecutive budgets under the coalition beginning in 2014. It's worth having a look at the overview for that budget handed down 10 years ago, when government spending totaled $415 billion. Joe Hockey said that government debt was projected to be $389 billion in 23-24, and that from the following year we would have surpluses up to 1% of GDP. Well, I'll tell you now, it didn't work out that way. Their modelling never does. In the Coalition's last budget in 22-23, government expenses reached $628.5 billion. So much for the Coalition's claim to be responsible economic managers. And then came the Albanese Labor government, also with the claim to be responsible economic managers. I don't know about you, but I've had a gutful of it.
Yes, yes.
What a complex joke that claim has turned out to be. Spending has now reached $785.7 billion. Gross debt is now over $1 trillion. It's a massive figure. 1 followed by 12 zeros. That's a trillion. That's 1,000 billion, or 1,000,000 times $1 million. It's critical that Australian voters understand this. It rolls off your tip of your tongue, but understand how much money it is. Labor and the Coalition have collectively borrowed more than $1 trillion in fewer than 20 years because they are incapable of running Australia within its means. If you ran your household their way, you would lose your house. If you ran your business their way, you would lose your business. Why do Australians keep voting for Labor and the Coalition when they run our country this way? Why? Labor has added another $63 billion of spending in just the past 3 months. So much of our money has been wasted by these so-called parties of government. One Nation's policy puts this waste in the bin where it belongs. We will slash wasteful government spending by $90 billion. The first cab off the rank will be the climate change scam. At its most basic, this is a joint policy of Labor and the Coalition to spend taxpayers' monies to make our electricity more expensive. Rising electricity bills have been the only outcome of their collective net zero madness. Global emissions continue to rise every year because no matter what the major parties tell you, nothing this country can do will make any difference on a planetary scale. We are crippling our own economy and forcing families into poverty and homelessness for no environmental benefit to anyone. One Nation's plan is to abolish the Department of Climate Change and related agencies and programs, saving at least $30 billion a year. We'll stop subsidising uneconomic renewables and make them compete on a level playing field with cheaper, more reliable energy from coal and gas. We anticipate this will save Australian households and businesses at least 20% of their electricity bills. We're not saying get rid of renewables, but we actually can have coal and gas. Make it cheaper for Australia. We need a diversity of power. One Nation's plan includes the abolition of the National Indigenous Australians Agency, saving $4.5 billion, and an audit on the entire Aboriginal industry. This industry has been an absolute failure in closing the gap, and I've been calling for this for the last 30 years. It is rife with fraud, corruption and nepotism which prevents Indigenous Australians in genuine need receiving assistance while enriching those who need none. We expect to save another $8 billion in useless Indigenous grants funding. One Nation policies goes much farther and will put an end to unwarranted race-based privilege in Australia. Australians overwhelmingly rejected race-based privilege at the Voice to Parliament referendum in 2023. Equal rights for all and special rights for none is the only fair approach in a free, representative democracy. Under One Nation's policies, no Indigenous Australian in genuine need will miss out on assistance, but they will have no more assistance than anyone else in genuine need. You don't close the gaps by treating Australians differently.
Correct.
Actually, it's divided us as a nation. And that's what I get so upset about. And there's a lot of Australians out there, because they're white, don't get the basic needs that they need. Their kids or their assistants.
Yep, disgraceful.
We are going to dismantle this culture of unwarranted entitlement, naked greed and racial hatred. One Nation's plan includes restoring the National Disability Insurance Scheme to its original purpose, providing only reasonable and necessary support to Australians with a disability. We support the NDIS and want to ensure it survives. We will review eligibility, introduce means testing, reduce unsustainable pay rates, and crack down on fraud. One Nation's plan also includes withdrawing Australia from a range of international bodies and agreements that do not work in Australia's interests. We must get out of the Paris Agreement. We must withdraw from the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum and the International Criminal Court. And we must withdraw from the United Nations and the UN Convention on Refugees. They're all out of date. We're past the use-by date. We have our own sovereignty, our own elected members of Parliament. Let's run our own country, yet, not be told by these people who haven't even set one foot on Australian soil and telling us how we should run our country. It has become a haven and a platform for the worst regimes in the world, legitimising terrorist states, theocracies and dictatorships. This is the UN. It has mutated beyond recognition. It no longer works in Australia's interests, so there's no compelling reason to remain part of it. We expect to save at least $1 billion by getting out of these organisations. We also expect at least another $3 billion in savings by reducing and redirecting Australia's foreign aid. Australians need so much help now, especially in the rising cost of living, housing, health, education, so many things. And I want to see Australians looked after first and foremost before anyone from overseas. Yes, you have a humanitarian by all means, and that's on the odd occasion, but why should we give a percentage of our GDP to other countries who have no regard, respect, and just take the money? I'm sorry, I'm for Australians first and foremost.
Yep.
Australia must get its own house in order before giving away money to anyone else. We must put Australians first. We will abolish the Therapeutic Goods Administration and roll out its essential functions into the Department of Health. You've got to question, why is the pharmaceutical companies putting money into the TGA? We'll also review about $3 billion worth of medicines put on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme during the COVID-19 pandemic. One Nation's plan includes privatising the SBS. Yes, you heard me. There's no longer any need for taxpayers to fund the SBS. And we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars a year. We have the internet now, providing anyone in Australia with the ability to access programming in their language from virtually anywhere. One Nation's plan also includes getting rid of most of the ABC. Oh, I can hear you cheering about that one. Everyone loves that one. Over $1.1 billion taxpayers' dollars goes into the ABC that is so left-leaning that you can't get fair account of issues. There is a case for taxpayers to fund ABC services in Australian markets where commercial media will not operate as a broadcaster and last resort. There is no longer any compelling case for taxpayers to fund the ABC in larger markets already saturated with media services. If people in these markets want ABC services, then they can pay for them, not taxpayers. We expect to save more than $1 billion from this measure. Our only revenue measure is something else that is long overdue, getting a fair run for our natural gas resources. One Nation's plan includes raising an additional $13 billion by charging levies at the point of extraction instead of on profits. We will also create a national domestic gas reserve so that Australia no longer faces energy shortages thanks to Labor's reckless obsession with renewables. By slashing $90 billion in government waste, One Nation liberates resources to pay down federal debt, invest in national building infrastructure and put $40 billion back in Australia's pockets. One Nation will implement a range of cost of living and tax relief measures. These include halving the fuel excise to 26 cents per litre for at least 12 months with an option to extend, eliminating the excise on alcohol served in hospitality venues, freezing the increases in the alcohol excise that occur twice a year and reviewing the excise regime entirely, exempting insurance premiums from the GST, allowing couples with at least one dependent child to split incomes and file joint tax returns, saving these families thousands of dollars in tax, allowing aged and veteran pensioners to earn money working without affecting their pensions, and lifting the tax-free threshold to $35,000 for self-funded retirees. Our plan includes additional elements that will put more money back in Australians' pockets. We'll crack down on Medicare fraud, estimate it to be up to $3 billion a year, and after a comprehensive review, implement practical measures to improve bulk billing rates to keep more GPs in the system. One Nation will improve home affordability by exempting basic building materials from the GST for the next 5 years for homes valued up to $1 million. This will also reduce the risk of building and construction companies collapsing. It's part of our overall policy to address Labor's housing crisis. With a policy now weekly copied by the major parties, One Nation will ban foreign ownership of residential property to increase housing supply for Australians. To improve affordability, we will also enable superannuation funds to invest part of an individual super as equity in the individual's primary residence. It's another policy weekly copied by the coalition, but unlike their policy, our policy leaves an individual super balance intact. One Nation's immigration policy will also have a big impact on Labor's housing crisis. One Nation will cap immigration at $130,000 130,000 people per year for all visa categories, including foreign students, to substantially reduce housing demand. This represents an effective reduction of 570,000 people a year. High immigration is costing taxpayers. It is not benefiting the economy. It's driving up inflation through high rents, and perversely, for the Labor government obsessed with net zero, driving up Australia's emissions. It is increasing congestion in our cities and impacting on public services. And mainly, it's driving up unprecedented demand for housing. This is forcing more Australians into mortgage stress, rental insecurity and homelessness. It has to stop. And One Nation has a policy that will stop it. We're the only party with an immigration policy that meets the expectations of the majority of Australians. One Nation is also backing Australians' farmers in Labor's undeclared war on the sector. We'll reverse the ban on live sheep exports. We'll restore balance to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan and let irrigators keep the water. We'll reduce their energy costs, build more efficient paths to export their produce, and look at better protections against cheap food imports. We'll also protect farmers' land and water from foreign ownership. One Nation will also invest in Australia's future with some real nation-building infrastructure. This includes the Hellgate Dam in Townsville, scrapped by Labor 2 years ago, and other water security projects. It includes building on the Inland Rail project to develop a national rail circuit for freight and passengers. It includes developing a world-class export and import container hub at the Port of Gladstone. It most definitely does not include even one more wind turbine, but we will support low emissions coal, gas and nuclear energy to power Australia's future more cheaply and reliably. One Nation is advocating the policies that alleviate the interests of Australians over special interests, foreign interests and harmful ideologies. We're advocating the policies that Australians want. We're advocating sensible policies that are now being copied by Labor and the Coalition, banning foreign ownership of housing, nuclear energy, cutting alcohol taxes, accessing super to improve home affordability, and auditing the Aboriginal industry. One Nation will put $40 billion back in Australians' pockets and will fix the causes of the rising cost of living, renewables, high immigration, and reckless Labor government spending. One Nation wants to protect our way of life, protect our standard of living, and ensure a prosperous and secure Australian nation, and will do it without imposing more costs and burdens on future generations. Unlike anyone else contesting this election, One Nation's plan puts Australia and Australians first. So make sure you put us first on your ballot paper at this election.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, we heard
that's the situation with regards to the One Nation budget. I thought it was quite well done, except for the fact that I would have loved it if she did it in New South Wales in front of a rally of people. I think that would have been phenomenal. And I think that she would have drawn the crowds. But unfortunately, one of the big things she has to consider, more so than Scott Morrison and Albo, is the threats to her life. The amount of, I've seen the back end of this, the amount of threats that are made against that woman's life is insane. And wherever she goes, she has to keep the police. It's like they protect, they're like her handlers almost. They constantly have to be updated on her movements and her safety, basically. It's just ridiculous. But anyways, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I was 10 or 11 or I wasn't 12. I was 10 or 11 when I moved to Sydney from Western Australia. I was born in Western Australia. I lived in the area that is now Tony Burke's electorate. I was told and taught that she was a racist, psycho, as I said before. And you know what? If she still owned that fish and chip shop, and you went up there now, and you said, "Oh, love, those scallops were brilliant. I'll grab a couple of those. I'll get a bit of calamari. I'll get this, that." She wouldn't say, well, "Don't call me love. Don't call me darling." Right? She's a real Australian. She speaks like an Australian, right? And she's run her own business, and several of them, from what I understand. Now, I know One Nation has had a number of issues with different things, but I just want to remind Australians, even if you don't agree with everything she says, and I don't agree with everything that she says, I agree with most of it, but not everything.
Yeah.
Right? I want you to have a look at the amount of Asians and Indians and immigrants that actually support her. And more importantly, I want you to remember that the Australian government, on behalf of the people, jailed that woman. That they put her in jail, right? Over political issues. So I think she speaks for many of us. She's brave enough to do so. People say, "Oh, well, she's not the greatest speaker. She's not so elegant." Good, because she's not a lawyer. Because she ran her own business. I'm going from memory now, I think she had a bad divorce, and then she got with another guy and all that sort of stuff. She's like the everyday Aussie. She's the everyday Queenslander. And she's fighting for this country. And there was very little in that speech she just delivered that I disagree with. Right?
That's right.
Economic issue. I'm not sure that we want to curtail foreign investment into properties over here. And I know that I'll probably get a heap of messages now, but it's driving up property prices. Yeah, I know that. I think that we should deal with the housing crisis a little bit differently. I think direct government subsidies would be better than restricting foreign ownership.
Subsidies?
That's just my view. It's one of the very few times that I'll say that I want government subsidies. But I think that would be better.
Right.
Having people use the superannuation funds, yeah, that sounds good in theory. But if you're 22 years old and you've been working, 3 days a week at Macca's since you were 15, and now you're 22, 23, and you're working at Red Rooster because you're going to uni and you just want that little bit of extra money, you don't have 50,000 in your super. So I do feel that there should be a different tactic that's being used. America allows people to deduct the interest costs on their primary residence against their taxes. I think there's things like that we should consider. Making it, people can salary sacrifice things. Maybe let people have their housing costs come out of their pre-tax income. I don't know. There's a lot of different options.
Yeah.
I'm not totally 100% convinced with what the coalition and One Nation is saying about housing right now. But it would be an improvement on what we've got. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but as I said, here's a woman, she's reading there. She's reading off a piece of paper. She doesn't have a teleprompter.
Yeah.
She's reading off a piece of paper.
Yeah.
She's mispronounced a couple of words.
Yeah.
She probably could have just said, "Please explain," when it comes to the budget from both parties, right? And that would have resonated. There was some clock or something ticking in the background.
Yeah.
There was
people going in and out.
She's
going off the script. She's saying, "I'm sick of it." Yeah. But it was raw and honest.
But it was. It was raw and honest. And she's just talking like an everyday Aussie who's fed up and sick and tired of what we've had to put up with.
Yeah.
And, I'd love her to she'll never be the Prime Minister, but I'd love her to be in Cabinet in some sort of position.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's so interesting, look at me. Because I have, since I was told that she was a racist and she was a bigot and blah, 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 when I was, 12, 13, 14 years old. Now, apparently, I'm a white supremacist.
Oh, you are. Huge.
Look at me.
Completely.
And Joel's an even bigger one. You're a white Nazi, aren't you? Is that what you've been called?
That's me, yeah.
So...
The Nazis have started to stick on eyebrows in their face, and the Nazis have started to wear blackface like you. There was an article about that. So back when Rukshan and I were covering the protests in late 2021 in Victoria, our version of the Babylon Bee, I wrote to them. I said, you should put this out as and I gave them a photo of me and Rukshan and this other black fellow that was with us. And yeah, it was hilarious because it was like, yeah, you know, the white nationalists, they've started wearing blackface and putting thick eyebrows on.
Yeah.
And that's just a sign of the times. It's changing. And there are immigrants that did integrate. When you talk to them on the phone, they sound like Aussies, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And yeah, you get a bit surprised when you meet Joel, and he looks like an Arab guy that just came off the construction site. And you do get a little bit surprised when you meet Shaquille, and you're like, and I got shocked when I met you. I was like, oh, I thought I was going to meet with a stocky Aussie white fella. And
well, I'm stocky. I'm a bit fat. I've got to do something about that. But,
yeah.
No, absolutely. And look, I used to, because a lot of people had problems trying to pronounce my name. Back in the day. So I used to just say, call me Jack. So they would hear Jack Latimer.
Yeah.
And so, like when I rolled up, they're like, "What is this like?" You know.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, as I said, this is the thing that gets me. I'll just say again. I know I'm going to get a heap of emails going. What are you talking about? You know, Penny Wong. She sounds pretty Aussie.
Yeah.
Right. Like, she's Aussie. I don't agree with her politically, but you know, she's pretty Aussie. Michaela Cash had a crack at her. About that tweet that came out. She said, "Oh, I didn't know anything about it," but she took it in a stride. She didn't react like she did about the sort of meow comment or whatever was made, 5 or 10 years ago, or however long ago it was.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, like this is what our nation's supposed to be about, and I think Pauline Hanson talks to that, and I think she says the sorts of things that a lot of people think and feel, but can't express, right? And like, I remember when she first came into Parliament, and I remember that our own side, the Liberal Party, because that's she joined the Liberals. She's just the local tuck shop lady. She runs a fish and chip shop. Yeah, good, because like you blokes are all like lawyers and accountants and crap like that. I'm now shitting on my own side, but I mean, I'm in finance. Like, you don't want accountants and lawyers in charge of everything. You don't want them selling off all of our assets and all this sort of stuff, and people are being left behind. Small businesses are struggling, etc.
Yeah.
And she's been talking about that again. I'm 41, so we're talking about stuff that she was talking about 30 years ago. Yeah. She was talking about this sort of stuff. And has it gotten better? So, I think it says a lot that they jailed this woman.
Yeah.
They jailed her.
Yeah.
And who's next? They're going to come after me? They're going to come after you?
Yeah.
Right?
They've done a big number on her, big branding sort of number on her.
Yeah. And look, there are structural issues in how One Nation runs, but that's again, that's neither here nor there. What's being missed by all of the media coverage of the structural issues is that she's talking on behalf of a lot of people. And I think that gets missed. And I think it gets missed. I think it was you that pointed this out to me. When it came to The Voice, the immigrant community, people who had immigrated here or first or second generation, especially first generation Australians that were born here, overwhelmingly voted against it.
Yeah, that's right.
You can't call all of us racist.
No.
You can't tell all of us that we're dinosaurs and dickheads. Right? There was a problem with what you were proposing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I really, really like Pauline Hanson. I've only met her twice.
Yep.
And it was like 30 seconds each time, like handshake sort of thing. So I can't say I know the woman or anything like that.
Yeah. We'll have to change that.
But I think
so you can really become inducted, baptized into the white nationalist church.
Pauline and I can enjoy a bottle of her gin. But she appears to me to be just a genuine Aussie, right? A genuine person, and I actually have a lot more respect for somebody who's done it the hard way, and have a look at her life compared to most other politicians, right? Compared to that person that I sent you a picture of earlier, right?
Beautiful guy, elegant. Was it a guy? Oh, sorry. Was it a girl?
I will make no comment. I don't know what a woman is anymore.
Okay.
But
that thing.
But that person that I introduced, that I showed you a picture of, a Greens member for Sydney, right? Who's, I can't relate to that, right? But I can half-by relate to, a chick that set up a fish and chip shop, right? And as I understand it, she actually had a few of them. And she actually did an interview, or there was like a report, and she actually got one of the reporters that didn't like her very much.
Yeah.
And they met, and they actually went back to her first ever fish and chip shop, right? And it was being run by Asians.
Yeah.
Right? And she was really friendly to them. They were really friendly to her. And she was saying to them, oh, look, when you do the dim sims, this is what we used to do.
Yeah.
Like she just comes across like a genuine,
very helpful
Aussie.
Yeah.
Right?
Whereas the media, the way they portray her,
demonise her.
it's like as if Jesus returning to the temple and he's turning tables over and he's doing a whip. That's what they were expecting from her. Yeah. You've turned this place into a den of Asians, a den of thieves. But no, she's a very genuine person. Absolutely.
Even that please explain thing, right? And okay, look, like objectively, it's kind of funny, and there was some. I don't know if
the song.
You were probably 2 years old when that came out, but it was kind of funny, like the way that she'd said it, and like the song that came out afterwards.
My language has been murdered. Yeah. My shopping trolley murdered.
That was kind of funny. Rodney Brood, I think, did a send up off her where he said he's gone into McDonald's and he's called the manager over. He said, "Hey, manager, Pauline Hanson sitting next to him, and what is she doing here? We've already got one red-headed clown, referring to her at McDonald's." There's some stuff that people have just been taking the piss, which is fine, but
she rolls with it.
She's been really attacked and misrepresented, and I really believe it's because all these lawyers. I mean, I'd love you to maybe get one of your researchers to find out how many people in Parliament are actually lawyers.
Oh, yeah, it's a crap ton.
Right? Like, what percentage is it? Is it 90%? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's so many of them in there, and, they think they know everything. And when somebody wants to, like Trump wants to drain the swamp or whatever, when someone comes in and starts pointing out, like, hey, this is not just the ridiculousness that happens in Parliament, but this is the effect it's actually having on everyday, ordinary Australians and ordinary people that are just trying to run small businesses and, ordinary things. This is the effect it's having. They get shut down. So, I have absolutely all the respect for what she's achieved. And I hope she's successful. I hope she increases her vote share.
Yeah.
I really do.
Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've kept you up really late, but I really wanted to cover both opposition speeches because Pauline Hanson, she's put one out. I haven't seen one from the other parties, but if they do, I'll put it out there if the opportunity presents. But this has been a long stream. I hope you got a lot of value out of it. If you want to support what we're all about, the election has kicked off, and we very much need you guys to get mobilised, start connecting with your political parties. This is why I got onto the tools very early, so we could roll this out just in case. So you can go to the Turning Point Australia website, tpaust.com.au. You can click volunteer. You can basically put your state in, for example, New South Wales. If you want to, you put your electorate that you're in. If you're not sure which electorate you're in, you can click here to find out. Click whichever party you want, Pauline Hanson, for example, and then you can click on the left here which way you want to volunteer for them, and you can click multiple things if you want. Again, I don't retain that information. I literally just pass that off to the party that you literally just selected. We've connected with all these parties and we've partnered with them so that they can get connected with you as much as possible, to hand out how-to-vote cards, to do scrutineering, to put up posters. We've got to get organised. The left do have permanent infrastructure, whereas we don't. And we are basically building this ship as we're sailing. So if you want to support that, phenomenal. If you want to donate to us and support that, do that through the site there. And if you want to become a member of this particular show and support this show, there's also a link in the description for the Buy Me a Coffee. I will be doing a members-only stream next week to actually go through some of the US things I've learned. I've been putting it off for a while because this is literally our 7th video this week we've come up with, actually 8th, because I did one later this afternoon. But I hope you're getting a lot of value out of the election and getting a lot of information as to what's going on in the country. But without further ado, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Shaquille, for jumping in, especially last minute this week. I really appreciated your insights with regards to this. But I will see you guys later.